Bob's Burgers is a remarkably consistent show when it comes to quality. Even now, 15 years into the series' life cycle, it feels as strong as ever, and year after year, across this consistent run, the show has managed to deliver incredible holiday-themed episodes for multiple holidays. And one of the holidays they just nail time and time again is Halloween. So, as a little Halloween-themed treat this year, I wanted to dive into Bob's Burgers' 12 Halloween episodes and see exactly what tricks make their formula work so well each and every year.
Yeah, let's turn some tricks.
Gene, don't say that.
Over the course of their 15 seasons, Bob's Burgers has released 12 Halloween episodes, delivering one nearly every single year. And in general, the fan base seems to really love these, myself included, and after sitting down and rewatching every single one, I think I've figured out exactly what makes them so damn charming. When you think about iconic animated Halloween episodes, it's impossible not to think about things like The Simpsons Treehouse of Horror, but obviously those opt to do shorter vignettes that exist outside of The Simpsons canon, which gives them the freedom and leeway to do crazy, supernatural, scary, spooky stuff. Even shows like South Park and Family Guy tend to move into a bit of a heightened reality when they deliver their Halloween stories. However, in general, Bob's Burgers exists much more grounded in reality than those shows. When an episode is centered on something seemingly supernatural or unrealistic, there is always a reasonable explanation rooted in the reality of the show. So what makes Bob's Burgers Halloween stories work so well is that they often find a way to implement the tone, themes, ideas, and tropes of horror stories into their very grounded reality. They always manage to make the setting and premise of an episode genuinely mysterious or unsettling without betraying the world they've built. And I think this leads to much more creative premises and answers to those mysteries. So let's get into Bob's first Halloween episode from season 3, Full Bars. Bob's Burgers' very first Halloween episode, Full Bars, is a bona fide classic. It has always been one of my favorite early run episodes. Full Bars does a great job putting the audience in the shoes of the kids who for the first time asked to trick-or-treat without Bob doing it with them. And their initial primary dilemma is that the candy pickings are slim.
We're trick-or-treating by ourselves for the first time ever. We need to get some real candy.
This introduces King's Head Island for the first time in Bob's Burgers, a sort of rich island community right off the coast. The kids decide it's worth taking the ferry so they can hopefully get better candy. And what I love about this is that it not only expands the world of Bob's Burgers outside of their fictional coastal New Jersey town, but it also introduces a setting that can easily become scary for the characters in question, given that the only way on or off the island is via that ferry. And at first, the entire plan is just going perfectly, re candy.
She just gave us full-size chocolate bars!
How does this not topple your economy?
However, via the King's Head kids they befriend when they get there, they also discover the risk factor they didn't account for by being on the island, and that is something called the Hell Hunt.
Every Halloween, after all the parents get drunk, the teenagers come out and they go freaking crazy.
Basically, 14 and 15-year-olds harass and terrorize younger kids, often by hurling water balloons filled with pee at them. Like I said earlier in the video, these scary scenarios are so perfectly rooted in the show's realism. This threat would obviously be terrifying for the Belcher kids, and that terror does not betray the grounded approach that the series takes. At its core, this is a horror story about kids trying to escape an island where they're being hunted down. Obviously, the specifics aren't nearly as horrifying or nefarious, but it's the exact same idea, and that's the kind of fear it's going to instill in these kids. They also manage to use a great mystery trope in their subplot where Bob and Linda go to Teddy's Halloween party. Bob doesn't dress up, and Teddy forces him to pick a costume out of his closet.
Now you don't look so ridiculous.
Unfortunately, before too long, Teddy discovers something horrifying. Somebody has stepped on and killed his guinea pig, Frances.
Oh, no, she's dead. No, she's dead.
The subplot basically turns into a murder mystery where Teddy refuses to let anyone leave the premises while he desperately tries to suss out who is responsible for the death of his beloved pet. And he goes way too far in his anger in some places, hilariously.
Maybe you didn't, Dennis, but I know you get dirty massages. Whoa.
As it turns out, when Bob was fitting into the fat suit that Teddy forced him to wear, he accidentally sat on Frances, killing her. Though, it also turned out that Frances was incredibly old and Teddy spray painted her orange and black, so her odds of surviving were not great to begin with. But as fun as the murder mystery is, the island plotline is the real highlight here. King's Head Island is a great new setting, it being so unfamiliar both as a new location and because it's a classier place than the Belcher kids are used to, makes it unsettling for them as they sneak around and evade the Hell Hunt. A country club at night is honestly a pretty spooky location.
It's like a huge miniature golf course.
The windmills are gonna be enormous!
The kids even have an opportunity to escape the island, but this is a really great early indicator of these kids' good nature. They aren't willing to leave their new friends behind even though they only just met them.
This town gave us the best candy we've ever seen. We owe it to them to go back.
Great! Now my candy tastes like guilt.
In fact, this entire resolution does a great job utilizing the specific character traits of the Belcher kids, and this was only like 25 or so episodes into the entire show, so they're establishing a lot here as well. But Louise is a little sadistic in her revenge on the teenagers, using an older girl's cell phone to text them and get them to do whatever she wants, which also leads to one of my favorite funny Tina moments.
Tell them to push their butts together.
This is just overall a great episode. The Belchers have a wild first experience trick-or-treating on their own, getting the best candy imaginable, making new friends, saving those friends from awful teenagers, getting revenge on those teenagers, and then being saved by the very kids they rescued, which gives those teenagers a pee-filled taste of their own balloon medicine. Plus, one of the funniest uses of slow-mo I have ever seen.
Ooh, so close.
But this first Halloween episode does both an escape from hunters on a remote island horror plot and a murder mystery plot without delving into anything supernatural or genuinely violent. It recreates the feelings and uses the tropes from those kinds of horror stories while remaining true to the world and characters. And what a great formula to establish, because this will be the constant and most impressive through line across the entire series of Bob's Burgers' excellent Halloween episodes. And the next year's follow-up did not disappoint. Season 4's Halloween episode introduces a long-running rival/thorn in the side for Louise, Millie Frock, played by the great Molly Shannon. Though the reason for this rivalry is that Millie is obsessed with Louise, desperate to be her friend on a stalkerish level. She's convinced she and Louise are going as Dust and Bunny as a combo costume for Halloween, ironically making Louise the Dust even though she is constantly wearing those bunny ears. And again, this is just a perfect scary trope rooted in the reality of this world. It's not at all unusual for kids to get weirdly obsessive and sometimes oblivious to how people are perceiving them, and so using that idea, putting the viewers in the shoes of the kids, makes for what will become our creepy Halloween monster of the year. But maybe even cooler is the setting in this one. Tina, Jean, and Louise invite Andy, Ollie, and Daryl into their super sick new fort in the back alley, and I mean super sick. This thing has multiple rooms and multiple floors. It's like a kid's dream fort. That is, until it becomes their dream prison, after a truck backs into the alley and traps them inside. And of course, the only person who knows they're in there is Millie, and her opinion of Louise shifts drastically after Louise lets her know how she really feels.
Oh, wow. I see you don't like me, huh?
Of course I don't. Who would?
Basically, the entire group of kids are held hostage by an unhinged Millie while trapped in an incredibly confined space. This is just a scary scenario, perfectly Bob's Burger-fied. Millie isn't quite in Jigsaw territory, but she definitely is playing with these trapped kids in a very sadistic way.
Somebody's in friend jail, and friend jail lasts forever.
She even drops spiders into the fort, though they do end up being fake spiders, but still the kids understandably panic about it. And the scenario isn't just scary. There are perfect Halloween stakes for the kids, which is if they don't get out in a reasonable amount of time, they're gonna entirely miss their window to trick or treat. Plus, Daryl has this map of all the best candy givers in the neighborhood. There is a lot on the line. The writers are just so good at escalating things that would be scary for kids specifically in these episodes. The episode also explores how these characters' wills start to break the longer they're trapped in the fort, which is another great angle for these scary stories. Friends turning on each other in dire situations, allegiances being questioned, good people turning bad. In his desperate state, Daryl ends up passing secret notes to Millie, basically trying to betray everyone else to free himself. And I think what I love most about this is how it pushes Louise over the edge.
You didn't know what you were doing, huh, buddy?
Oh, my pants are off.
Yeah. So, what do we do with a snitch?
I think the most interesting thing explored by this episode is the fact that Louise and Millie, frankly, aren't all that different. Millie is maybe a little more overtly obsessive and obnoxious, but both are characters who crave control perhaps a little too much, and so suddenly we've got Louise enacting a revenge on Daryl in a sadistic way that's very reminiscent of the way Millie was sadistically toying with all of these trapped kids. Also, the way they actually escape the fort is pretty genuinely terrifying. They try to trigger the lift on the truck and accidentally lower it instead of raise it, threatening to crush them. They stack some sturdy objects, the entire truck lifts, and they crawl to safety, but only just in time. They were literally moments from being crushed. This is rooted in a more realistic world, but unlike some of these other Halloween stories, this one is actual nightmare fuel right here. That is just a horrifying scenario. The subplot in this one doesn't really have any scary or horror parallels, but it is very funny, with Bob and Linda desperately trying to craft the kids' group dragon costume in time that they run out of, leaving off with a pretty awful end product.
China would be furious about this dragon. They love dragons there.
I guess not every Halloween subplot can perfectly adapt horror tropes to this world, but at least they can make us laugh. The final beat is pretty great too, with Millie returning and believing that all of the kids were crushed by the truck lift and that she's responsible. And of course, the Belchers pretend to be ghosts to reinforce her guilt.
Oh no! Oh, I didn't mean to kill you. I was just gonna keep you in there until you got old.
So Bob's Burgers just fully went 2 for 2 in their first couple Halloween entries. Incredibly creative stories set from the perspective of a kid that then devolve into perfectly adapted horror concepts without breaking the reality of the world. How do they keep this up? Let's find out. Bob's Burgers' third Halloween outing took things in a little bit of a different direction. It definitely had some scary aspects, but it's mostly a pretty great character-focused story centered on Tina, and once again uses a seemingly supernatural hook. This one takes place in the days leading up to Halloween, with Tina hoping to get invited to the old cemetery by Jimmy Jr.
Everybody's going at the same time. We're not going together.
These early scenes help re-establish Tina's ongoing struggles with staying in with the cool kids, which ends up being a huge focus in this episode. But the whole quote-unquote supernatural hook comes later when an exterminator shows up to get rid of a bug problem at the restaurant and is certain that the restaurant is haunted.
Those are probably phantasmal bugs attracted to the spirit world.
Sure. Phantasmal bugs.
The exterminator explains how to hold a seance and trap the spirit in some kind of vessel, so the kids and Linda then use a Ouija board, and according to the ritual, the ghost is a 13-year-old boy named Jeff, whom they trap in a shoebox.
Bobby, calm down. We caught the ghost. His name is Jeff. Everything is fine.
Honestly, the way Tina and Jeff's stories converge in this one is so funny. When the kids take Jeff to school, somehow all of the kids in Tina's class think he is super cool. Yes, this shoebox. They all seemingly actually believe there is a ghost in the shoebox. And because he's friends with Tina, that makes her cool by association. And with Tina's teenage obsession with boys, she actually decides she wants to start dating Jeff. They even do this full-on montage where she has these cute little dates with the shoebox. And of course, this somehow succeeds in making her popular.
You guys are so cute together. You're the new it couple.
Now, obviously, as we've established, Bob's is set in a very realistic world. Actual supernatural phenomenon like this doesn't really exist, and there are always alternative explanations. And this one is no different. As it turns out, Louise was the one controlling the Ouija board to mess with Tina, and it went way further than she ever intended it to. But what I love about this ghost story is that because the ghost isn't real, it ultimately says a lot about Tina and the other kids at school. Tina can seem a little desperate for love and attention, and in this story, she was literally willing to date an empty shoebox to gain both of those things from a significant other and the other kids at school. And I mean, it also says a ton about Tammy, let's be real. God, what a character that is just so fun to hate. Tammy ends up faking a message on the bathroom mirror, claiming that Jeff wants to break up with Tina and start dating Tammy.
Nobody's saying it, but Jeff is a scoundrel.
I think the most fascinating thing about this is that it basically means that Tammy suspects the ghost isn't real at all, but also she is so desperate for popularity and validation, and also to screw over Tina, that she pretends to date a box herself. At which point, Louise really struggles with how to reveal that this was all fake.
If we tell her the truth, she's gonna feel heartbroken and dumb.
The resolution to this one is a pretty major moment for Tina. She traps all the other kids in a mausoleum at the cemetery and makes them think Jeff is this malevolent spirit. She goes really far out of her comfort zone to make these things happen and shows some pretty significant insight.
But the things we wanted from Jeff were real. I wanted a boy to pay attention to me and never leave my side. Ugh.
Oh, man. I wanted to believe that there's more than this life.
There are some great moments at the end of this thing. Louise being really impressed by her sister is just a great, charming sisterly moment. And it's another great example of Bob's Burgers crafting a spooky episode concept rooted in the characters. And honestly, the next one on the list might be the one that accomplishes this from a character perspective better than any other.
Trick or treat, girl, it's freaky.
Say it!
With Season 5 putting the focus on Tina for their Halloween fair, Season 6 shifts to Louise with The Haunting. And this has gotta be not just one of my favorite Halloween episodes, but one of my favorite episodes of the entire show. Not only is this an amazing premise for one of Bob's more grounded Halloween stories, but it's just a perfect example of why I love the Belchers so much as a family. Actually, I even talked about this episode in my first ever Bob's Burgers video years ago. The whole crux of the story is that Louise is impossible to scare, something she is both seemingly kind of proud of, but also laments. She's jealous that other people get to experience fear the way that she doesn't.
I would love to be scared. The problem is I see every scare coming a mile away.
But this year, Bob and Linda have planned a special haunted house for her. Yep, a haunted house that Bob and Linda planned themselves. I think going into this story, you'd probably expect it to play out exactly how it does at first. A completely haphazard attempt to scare Louise that goes wrong at nearly every turn. Linda is Lady Barbenstein, Bob is Dr. Barbenstein, with an absolutely ridiculous purple afro wig.
Ah, that wig is scary and so are the countertops!
Every single thing that Bob and Linda seemingly planned absolutely does not work on Louise, down to the type of pasta they used for Linda's fake intestines.
Mom, angel hair?
What? It's all we had.
It's just, that's the least scary pasta. It's in the name.
Louise ends up scaring Bob and Linda herself and then insisting that they just go home. It's not worth going through with any more of this. And then comes the turn. Turns out they have a flat tire, have to stick around the house a little longer, and scary stuff starts actually happening. Beginning with this really creepy dude at the end of the driveway. The family retreats inside, and suddenly it feels like the Belchers are at the center of an actual horror story. Stuck inside a strange house as somebody is seemingly after them. The lights go out, they have to flip the breaker, there's scary shrieks, a mysterious doll with sticks in its eyes, and it literally ends with the entire family out on the roof of this creepy old house as cloaked culty figures set the entire yard on fire, waiting for them to come down, at which point Louise finally screams.
Oh, what is happening?
Gotcha.
We gotcha.
God, Louise's reaction here is so good. She had absolutely zero idea that her family was even capable of something like this. It never crossed her mind. She just needs everything to be explained to her step by step. They did a terrible decoy haunted house so she would let her guard down. Jean and Tina were in on it the entire time and acting. They all went so far out of their way to give Louise exactly what she wanted, to be scared.
I got scared! I got scared! Oh, you're the best family in the whole world.
It is such a smart setup. Obviously, if it felt like a haunted house, Louise wasn't going to be scared, but if Louise actually believed that her parents were scared as well, and that they didn't even know what was happening, that's gonna get nearly any kid, even the bravest of them, to be frightened. This is one of my absolute favorite episodes of Bob's Burgers. As a Halloween episode, it's genuinely a great setup and execution for a spooky story, and as a character piece, it not only gives a great focus to Louise, but it really showcases how far the Belchers will go for each other. This familial relationship is the core of the entire show. Without it, it would not work at all, and few episodes showcase that love and care for each other better than this one does. It's even one of the few Halloween episodes without a B story, just a full-on spooky adventure through their haunted house experience front to back, and it's never boring even for a moment. It sort of perfectly represents what I love most about the Bob's Burgers Halloween episodes as well. It's all about the characters' perspectives. Even if we as the audience know that these Halloween horror premises always have some kind of explanation in the end, this time they put us in Louise's shoes, and the mystery was compelling until the end of the episode, with an incredibly satisfying conclusion. This is just a great one. After a great Belcher family story, Bob's Burgers shifted to another Tina Halloween episode with Teen a Witch. This one is definitely more in line with Tina and the Real Ghost, using a supernatural hook to illustrate the ongoing internal struggles that Tina deals with. Tina's main motivation here is to win the Halloween costume contest, which she's come incredibly close to winning year after year, and this year she's got the perfect creative costume idea to dress messy and decorate herself in flames, an idea that Tammy immediately steals.
Wait,
you're gonna be a hot mess? Because I'm actually gonna be a hot mess.
Tammy is a character who is wildly confident in everything she does, typically in an entirely self-serving way. And that's sort of the idea that this episode plays with in relation to Tina, who is a kinder but less confident kid. We see this in action when Jackie, the crossing guard, doesn't let Tina cross the street, even though no cars are coming, and Tina isn't able to catch back up to Tammy to confront her about the whole costume thievery. And so this year's Supernatural hook is once again focused on how something spooky can help change the perception of Tina, though this time it more so changes her behavior. The librarian, Mr. Ambrose, basically hands Tina everything she needs to participate in witchcraft.
Be a witch, then you can cast a spell to win the contest.
Tina speed runs through this entire spellbook, and many of the spells seem to work, even if there maybe could be real-world explanations for each and every one. But because the spells appear to work, Tina completely owns the witch persona, changes her clothing, walks through school with wild newfound confidence, casting spells or threatening to cast spells left and right.
I cast all the spells in this book. Can I get a new one?
You cast all the spells?
Yeah.
It's a reference book. You're not supposed to run through it like in Us Weekly.
But as I will say over and over again as my broken record phrase for this video, Bob's is obviously not set in a supernatural or magical world. Tina's spell success is all coincidence, but the important result of her witch phase is the confidence. She taunts other students about the costume contest, she makes Jimmy Jr. walk her to class, and the biggest mistake of all, she threatens Jackie the crossing guard and gets a taste of her own medicine.
In 24 hours, your fate will be worse, 'cause the girl who casts spells now is cursed.
I think this is such a fascinating look at Tina as a character. The moment she gained that extra confidence from her witchcraft, she started acting less and less like herself and more like Tammy, which is to say, a real asshole. Tina is generally a character who is very sure of herself, but that doesn't necessarily translate to outward confidence. She knows what she loves and she knows what she wants, but she's also such a sweet and quiet girl. She often lets others walk all over her, and in this story, rather than being more assertive about her own boundaries, she instead starts to cross over other people's boundaries. And once she gets a taste of that in a scarier, witchier way from Jackie, leading her to think she's gonna die, Tina realizes how wrong she was.
I'm just gonna try to be more confident and less mean to crossing guards. You know, that's a really cliche thing to say, but I mean it.
The subplot of this one is actually also really fun. Just a really low-stakes mystery where Bob's jack-o'-lanterns continue to disappear every time he makes a new one. The poor guy feels like he's going insane, and it honestly just has a silly and reasonable explanation. Mr. Fish Odor is so entitled, he thought everyone was leaving the pumpkins out for him.
It's like how people keep giving me bikes.
And I can't lie, his pumpkin-laden yard is pretty awesome looking. I love this scene on a visual level. But once again, this is a great episode that uses spooky Halloween ideas to explore character insecurities. We get that Tina is a witch now hook without ever doing anything actually supernatural, and instead creating a scenario where Tina's lack of confidence can be explored in a new way. Plus, a silly Bob-o'-lantern subplot. It's a fun one. Oh man, this is another one of my absolute favorite Boboween episodes. While it maybe doesn't dive as deep into any specific character, it sets an unbelievably spooky tone and mood and delivers what I think is just a hilariously fun reveal, one so perfectly embedded in the world of Bob's Burgers. The big mystery this year is that people have allegedly been seeing a wolf in the park. Allegedly.
It's allegedly extremely dangerous and allegedly out for blood, wreaking alleged havoc on our quiet little community. Allegedly.
So the idea that there is some kind of actual monster out and about on Halloween night, a night that is particularly foggy, might I add, is the big Halloween hook. Linda has to go trick-or-treating with the kids because of the alleged wolf, but most trick-or-treaters either go elsewhere or stay in, which means candy pickings are once again slim. If this is any one character's episode, I guess it might be Linda's, who really wants to be seen as a fun parent while out trick-or-treating, and so rather than call it a night, she suggests something spooky.
Hey, isn't that the park where people keep seeing the Wonder Wolf? Why don't we go over there and find it? Searching for a wolf is a great fun Halloween adventure.
Man, I just love how this episode looks. The fog-ridden town is such a vibe. This is honestly one of my favorite looking episodes of all of Bob's Burgers. And then in the background of this whole wolf hunt is the fish odors, who are sorta suspiciously looking for their missing alpaca, while also being very dismissive about the idea of the wolf even existing.
The wolf? Wolves aren't real, Linda.
And I haven't even mentioned the subplot, which actually ends up tying into everything in a wildly satisfying way. Bob is stuck at home with a sprained knee, whiny, doped up on pain pills, which they establish pretty quickly make him sort of paranoid.
Remember the time you thought the rug was making fun of you?
Linda has Teddy come over to keep an eye on Bob, and the more pain pills Bob takes, the more and more paranoid he gets. This is honestly such a fun story because it basically creates a supernatural dilemma that only exists in Bob's mind. He notices a bite mark on Teddy and then fully starts to believe that the Wolf of Wharf Street is a werewolf that has bitten Teddy, and therefore Teddy is a werewolf.
He can't be a werewolf, that's crazy. Oh no, he's transforming!
I gotta say, doped up paranoid Bob is super funny, and it's another great example of this show finding really creative ways to put our characters into spooky horror-like situations without betraying the realism. They're masters of it at this point. Back in the park, the Belchers keep finding more and more evidence that a wolf might be there, and they even run into Randy, who's trying to catch the wolf on camera himself. Eventually, they think they're cornered, where Linda braves the quote-unquote wolf to protect her family, and as it turns out, it was just that alpaca.
Hi, cutie, what's your name? Oh, never mind.
But I think nothing really beats how Bob's plot ties into the wolf hunt here. We've got a great hot pursuit thriller sequence where Bob hobbles away from Teddy on crutches, while Teddy carries the coffee table he's handcuffed to, trying to catch up with Bob. Honestly, Table Teddy, pretty scary. But in his paranoid state, Bob wanders into the park to hide from Werewolf Teddy, only to see an actual wolf. Okay, so 8 seasons into these Halloween episodes, this is such a great reveal because at this point, we're conditioned to be looking out for whatever non-horror explanation there actually is for the Halloween hook of the episode. And on top of that, we know Bob is potentially hallucinating because of the pain pills. So this initial reveal is still leaving questions on the table until we get the actual explanation, an explanation whose odor is a little fishy.
I told you you weren't ready to have a wolf, Felix.
I am ready! The wolf house I was building wasn't ready!
God, this is perfect. It's just perfect. While you might have been expecting or brainstorming what the wolf might actually be, they pull the rug out and reveal that it's the town's 2 richest idiots who let it escape, which is just an incredibly Felix Fischoeder thing to do. It's an amazing reveal that feels more horror and supernatural at first than Bob's has ever done, but is still rooted deeply in the characters of the show. Man, this one is just so fun. It's a monster hunt on a spooky night story combined with a sort of medical patient gets increasingly insane while fleeing a werewolf story. Once again, built into really fun, realistic explanations. A top-tier Halloween episode.
If I want to put some sweets all up in my teeth, it's none of your business.
For season 9, Bob's Burgers finally found a way to basically take on the slasher genre with their Halloween episode Nightmare on Ocean Avenue Street. The cool change this year for Halloween is that there's a city-planned candy crawl, so Ocean Avenue is closed off from traffic so that kids can trick-or-treat safely up and down that single street. And like with the slasher genre, putting a bunch of characters in a confined location is a recipe for them to be picked off one by one. But obviously, as this is Bob's Burgers, we aren't talking murder here. We're talking something that to these kids is much, much worse. Their candy is being stolen one by one, starting with Rudy and Daryl.
My candy! My candy! My beautiful candy!
This is once again a great way to transpose a horror subgenre onto a Bob's kid-centric story. No murder, but something that's equally scary to kids, and it devolves into some of the other tropes we see in those kinds of stories as well. Out of fear and desperation, they even start blaming their friends for the theft.
There's a group of teens stealing kids' candy. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you? Would you?
Easy there, Sister Mary yelling at me!
With seemingly different kids stealing the candy each time, they cautiously walk through the candy crawl, desperately trying to protect their candy while searching for various different costumes, until they see a gorilla making off with Tina's candy. Oh man, this is another of my favorite silly movie tropes, just busting into a car and yelling, "Follow that blank," which the kids do with this city bus. This line kills me every time.
Wait, what am I doing? I have a root. I give in to peer pressure way too easily.
This episode doesn't do anything particularly deep with its characters, but they really recreate the stressful environment of a slasher film, especially with this final sequence where they chase the candy thief into Mutilation Mansion, this super scary haunted house. Gene and Tina actually stay outside while Louise leads the other kids in, so everyone remains pretty firmly in character here.
There's no turning back now, Rudy.
Well, the door's right there.
There could be some turning back now. It's not far.
I guess the big character moment in this one is that Gene and Tina get get over their fear and thwart the candy thief, saving their friends. The culprit ends up being Dr. Yap, their dentist, which was set up pretty well earlier in the episode with his flyer offering $1 a pound for candy. And again, this is a great realistic motivation that is in character for Dr. Yap, trying to prevent kids from ruining their teeth with the new popular candy Sticky Sugar Booms. This one has a pretty fun subplot as well. It's one of those that's Halloween themed, but not really pasted over any spooky or scary trope. Basically, Teddy and a rival handyman are sort of competing to see who can do the coolest decorations between Bob's Burgers and the current business next door, which is a candle shop. The decoration ideas are all really cool, and each one that Glenn puts up motivates and pushes Teddy to do something even cooler. And what a fun escalation, just a ridiculous way to make this giant spider scarier.
I'm not explaining to the kids that their dad died in a chainsaw spider accident.
And this result is this insanely pseudo-gruesome sequence where the spider destroys the neighboring decorations. It's really funny visually. Typically, if Bob's can't find a way to make the subplot particularly horror-themed, they find a great way to hook through real-world Halloween antics. It took them a while to hit a slasher parody, but they did a great job with it.
Big trouble, little Tina.
Alright, so out of all of the Bob's Burgers Halloween episodes, this one grosses me out the most. Not because it's a particularly scary horror episode or anything, but because of these adorable dead little fetal pigs. Man, I do not like seeing dead baby pigs in Bob's Burgers animation style. It seems like when Bob's Burgers isn't focusing on transposing horror tropes into their world, they really like to explore Tina as a character in the Halloween episodes. Much like Tina and the Real Ghost, this one focuses on Tina wanting to be invited to a Halloween event that her classmates are going to, and like Tina Witch, it focuses on her behavior changing uncharacteristically to win them over. When Tina's fetal pig is kinda, well, ugly, she makes fun of it in class and everyone gets a kick out of it, which leads to her getting that coveted invite to the haunted hayride.
Then you called him Puke Chop, and I was like,
Nailed it!
Sure, yep.
hey, you should come with us on the hayride.
But unlike Tina Witch, the entire idea here is that Tina isn't comfortable with her changed behavior, and basically her own guilty conscience becomes the Halloween hook.
And I feel totally fine about it, because it's just a dead pig, and I'm a human girl going on a romantic hayride.
Because of how obviously stressed she is about how out of character she acted, that dead pig starts haunting her. Obviously, this is a manifestation of that guilt, which is what makes this another well-done Bob's Burgers horror story, but she dreams of the ghost of the piglet, which of course makes her feel even worse. And then because of her nightmares, she barely gets any sleep and is just in a constant hallucinogenic state because of her sleep deprivation. Honestly, maybe the craziest thing this episode does is have Louise introduce like this Japanese demon lore to try and quell the pig spirit, putting its organs back in it alongside a drop of Tina's blood and burying the piglet. Pretty insane thing to see these kids do, all things considered. And maybe most fittingly, Tina's sleep deprivation ends up sort of ruining her hayride. She falls asleep before she and Jimmy Jr. can kiss. Basically, the result of Tina betraying her own sense of self to get what she wants was that she actually didn't get what she wants. I think the climax of this one might be one of my least favorites in the show, mostly because it takes place in Tina's dream, which sort of gives them the leeway to actually do and show more supernatural phenomenon without any issue. And I think that my favorite thing about these Bob's Halloween episodes is the creative problem solving that comes with finding actual explanations for the horror stuff. Placing it in a dream kind of makes it so that they don't have to come up with those creative solutions. But this is a bit of a nitpick because overall this is still a really fun Halloween entry. Though for the subplot they just opted for gross, focusing on Bob needing to purge his ears of these gross balls of wax. Honestly, this entire episode is kind of a gross out between the dead pigs and the wax balls, and Gene nearly eats them. Ugh.
No, Gene!
But despite a couple misgivings, Bob's once again lays a great horror idea over a character-focused story. Season 11 delivers another of my absolute favorite Halloween episodes, Heartbreak Hotel-oween, where the kids basically have to solve a 50-year-old mystery in a spooky hotel. Great setting, great premise. This Halloween, Louise is very caught up in getting revenge on a house that wronged her. They basically ran out of candy and then promised her double candy the following year, only to deny her not only the double candy, but the one piece that they owed her that year. She concocts this entire plan for all of the kids to dress up in a snail costume, distract the homeowner, and then steal steal the candy through a hatch in the snail. It's just, classic Louise stuff. But before they can trick or treat, they have to deliver a burger to this spooky hotel, only to discover a creepy old woman holding a seance. As it turns out, she's trying to lure her former lover's spirit out with the burger.
And when he shows up, I'll banish him to hell for all eternity.
Whoa.
Like I said, great spooky premise, great location, I am invested. The personal struggle in this episode is that Tina is not on board with the whole candy stealing plan, and so she opts to try and stay and learn more about Dolores' plan and beef with her former lover. Basically, 50 years ago, Dolores and Roger were having a great time at a Halloween party. He was tossing peanuts in his mouth, having fun, but he disappeared after going to get them a drink. Dolores had heard that he was seen with I Dream of Jeannie by the elevator, and then the next day he was found dead. She believed that he cheated on her before he died, and has held it against him ever since. And another fun aspect of this episode is how everyone who's in the hotel at the time is really invested in this story. Tina is very convinced there must be another explanation, and there's this great moment where a bunch of photos and letter evidence goes missing, and even though sticking around the hotel means that Louise can't go through with her plan, she still sticks up for Tina and potentially ruins her own hopes for their Halloween night.
Guess what, people? You mess with the snail head, you mess with the snail tail. And now the snail tail wants some answers.
Thanks, Louise.
Louise is a great character. While she can be selfish sometimes, she will often fully go to bat for the people she cares about most, especially her family. This episode does a great job injecting a few different mysterious scenarios. Obviously, there's the ongoing solving a 50-year-old mystery aspect, but once this evidence goes missing, it sort of turns into a murder mystery format, where Louise questions the hotel guests one by one to find motives for taking the evidence. And honestly, the 50-year-old mystery resolution is very satisfying. All of the pieces were in place earlier. Roger was unknowingly allergic to peanuts, the I Dream of Jeannie was a doctor trying to help him, and the anaphylactic shock caused the heart attack that he died from.
At least he died doing what he loved, eating peanuts in a hotel lobby.
I just love this whole setup, setting, everything. A really fun episode. I do think that they maybe could have gone a tiny bit further to tie Dolores' ill-conceived plans for revenge to Louise's own ill-conceived plans for revenge. As it stands, they're sort of just parallel but don't intersect as much as I'd like. It would be cool if Louise had learned her lesson through what she learned about Dolores, but instead she just sort of lost a bet with Tina, and so they didn't go through with it. But it is still a really fun, satisfying episode. And Tina's point of view is very sweet in regards to Dolores' regret for keeping up her anger for so many years.
I mean, it's sort of romantic. In your own twisted way, you loved Roger so much that you kept this thing going for 50 years.
Tina even suggests that Dolores rebound with Gus down in the lobby, which leads to what has gotta be the most insane line in Bob's Burgers history.
I'd like to see that guy catch a nut.
I know it makes sense in context, but Jesus. This one also has a pretty fun subplot where Bob is coerced by Teddy into donating blood even though he hates blood and needles. It leads to him collapsed on the floor of a bloodmobile. Actually, another really good example of highlighting something that is scary to a character, even if it's not an inherently scary situation. Plus, blood. This is a quality episode. The more of these episodes they make, the more impressed I am when they find a new horror angle that they haven't previously explored, and this one is pseudo-adopting the I Know What You Did Last Summer premise, but for Gail and Linda having smashed a ton of pumpkins for a pumpkin carving contest in high school. It even opens 27 years prior.
We'll never speak of this again.
But then 27 years later, the pair get these spooky letters alluding to their high school crime, sending them spiraling. Obviously, for most Halloween episodes, they focus on the kids. It's a kid-centric holiday after all. But this is such a fun and smart way to put the focus on some adult characters, and pairing Linda and Gail is always funny, especially in this circumstance where Gail is just incredibly aggressive in her attempts to discover who is trying to blackmail or threaten them, with honestly no logic attached to her actions whatsoever.
What is happening?
You know what's happening. This is about the pumpkin carving contest.
The episode is structured really well, too. It opens with the aftermath of the smashing, but then slowly reveals more of how they were all smashed over the course of the episode. Linda smashed her own, seemingly on accident, then Gail slipped and smashed another, so they both decided that they were going to smash the entire lot and make it look like an accident. The episode does a great job sort of just putting the pair in weird situations. One of their classmates, Scary Terry, who grooms dogs, offers to cut Gail's hair, and so she's just sitting there with a dog fog cone around her shoulders underneath the scissors of someone who could be the person that's blackmailing them. It is weird. And honestly, as fun as this episode is, the reveal of who is blackmailing them isn't all that exciting. It turns out to be Gail's new therapist who's trying to get her to confront her past, but the reveal that is very satisfying is a great Linda and Gail moment. It turns out Linda actually smashed her own pumpkin on purpose because she found out she was supposed to win the contest, and Gail has always seen herself as the more creative sister.
I know you'd be crushed. I know how hard you worked on yours, and I just couldn't let it happen.
I love when these story reveals are rooted in the characters, and I think opting to make the more important part of the backstory this character reveal rather than the why are they being blackmailed works perfectly. We talk a lot about how great of a family the Belchers are and how their wholesome nature is really what makes the show work so well, but that extends beyond the immediate family too. I love seeing how Linda's strong familial bond even stems back to her own childhood with her sister. The subplot in this one is another that is more focused on the mechanics of Halloween than something spooky. The kids are devastated to learn that Bob has somehow secured the best candy on the market, and he's going to hand it all out to the kids on Halloween. Obviously, the Belchers want the candy for themselves. There isn't a ton to this story, but it is just pretty funny to see the kids get increasingly desperate to stop Bob from giving out that candy. Of course, they each get one in the end. Bob is a good father. Overall, I love that the show managed to find a way to really focus one of these Halloween episodes on someone other than the kids in a satisfying way. It gives us some really great insight into Linda's childhood and relationship with her sister, and adopts that I know what you did 27 years ago formula that pushes the character's paranoia to its limits. It's a really fun one. This is another fun one, focusing on Louise and her friend Jessica while on a holiday field trip, this time to an old-timey apple orchard.
Today we want to show you how land was farmed in the British Isles in the year 100 BC, or as Brom and I call it, the right now times.
The episode sort of explores popularity dynamics in the class. That's the more fun and grounded kid story going on. Basically, there's this popularity vacuum because Chloe Barbash isn't on the trip, but different kids keep trying to fill it with various bits and skills. First, Jessica seizes it with a good lamb impression, then Rudy kind of takes over with some great close-up magic, and then just to prove a point, Louise takes control with this weird hand thing.
How do you do that?
How impressed these kids are by all these meaningless, stupid human tricks is really funny, and they sort of lay this dynamic over the old-timey orchard folks picking a hero of the harvest for their ceremony. But to me, this episode is basically pulling from two movies. Both movies I actually really love, The Village and Midsummer. The whole hero of the harvest being chosen for a ceremony is basically exactly what we see in Midsummer with the May Queen, and then this being this old-timey place where people act like it's a different time period is very The Village. Plus, these skull monsters are just very reminiscent of the monsters from The Village. It's a really fun combo to put these things together, honestly. But the later dilemma comes from Louise's fear that being the hero of the harvest actually means she's going to be sacrificed after she discovers this art in a barn that she and Jessica sneak off to so they can leap into giant piles of hay. It's a super Louise subplot. Overall, I think this is another episode that really just excels at atmosphere. The apple orchard on the dreary fall day has very spooky vibes. It looks a lot different than most Bob's Burgers episodes with the more muted, earthy backgrounds. The old-timey aspect makes it feel pretty unsettling and unnatural, not to mention these monster costumes. And putting the kids in the old-timey place is a good excuse to make that unsettling atmosphere more realistic. Obviously, there is an explanation for everything. The mural was actually from a different pagan ritual Halloween event for older kids, and the employees just made a mistake in introducing the monsters to the younger kids.
In my defense, I forgot kids were scared of things.
And the subplot is yet another mechanics of Halloween gone wrong story, with Tina and Jean's part of the Belchers group costume continually falling apart all day. Tina is a Twister, Jean is Bill Paxton from Twister, and Louise is Helen Hunt from Twister. While waiting for Louise to return and the competition to start, the costumes just aren't staying intact, and so Linda has to keep coming to school to fix them. Honestly, one of my favorite aspects of this subplot is just Mr. Frond continually throwing shade at their costume.
Yeah, you're not trying too hard at all.
There's also a really funny subplot where Bob really wants to see the beehives they keep at the apple orchard, but they just kind of keep ignoring him or outright denying him from seeing them. Bob totally would be the kind of guy who would be interested in beekeeping, so this little tiny through line I found pretty funny.
Or Or we could do some bee stuff?
We don't have time.
Darn it.
Too bad. The bees are really great.
This is overall not one of my top tier favorite Bob's Burgers Halloween episodes, but it still exudes an incredible atmosphere in a really cool, spooky type of setting we don't normally see in this series. Even when the show doesn't deliver a top tier story, they still give us something new and interesting. And finally, we've reached the most recent Halloween episode, which is literally actually the most recently aired episode of Bob's Burgers at the time that I'm writing this video. And man, did I really like this one. While the show has managed to sort of do the murder mystery detective thing a few times over these Halloween episodes, this one still manages to find a completely new angle, utilizing these creepy dolls for Louise to tell her story. But this is also another example of a great, wholesome Belcher family story focused on the characters, and it's definitely one of my faves that has ever focused on Jean and Louise's relationship. It opens with the trio walking home while Jean is upset that he wasn't invited to a Halloween gathering.
See you at Julian's gathering.
What? When?
Oh!
This episode does a great job planting these seeds for the mystery for the audience. Just small things that all end up culminating in a really nice ending. The whole lack of an invite to the gathering, Jean excitedly recognizing Miss Bizzlebender in the doll store, Louise seemingly recognizing her as well, but not letting on how or why, and then mysteriously staying behind to set something up with her as well. The pair basically set up an entire dollhouse murder mystery for her family to be a part of. Jean and Tina have to try and solve the murder while the parents observe, though Bizzlebender thought that maybe they all understood a little bit more about it than they did.
How much of this did Louise explain to you? Because I assumed everything, but I'm starting to think maybe nothing.
And keeping everyone out of the loop here works really well to inspire curiosity in the viewer. It's all just really compelling in my opinion. The entire episode I was like, what is this even about? Which is exactly how Jean felt, so I guess it does a really good job putting us in the shoes of the character, though Jean was obviously operating with a little bit more information than we were. Basically, the murder mystery is filled with specific references to things that Jean seems to recognize. The first victim wrote camel toe in blood on the floor. There was a mysterious accidental death of a teacher named Miss Bickelbonger. Just allusions to very specific things.
Why is this about me?
It's not. Wait. Is it?
And I really love how they did this, because while the whole murder mystery is happening to the dolls, obviously there are these real world stakes for whatever that murder mystery is paralleling, which seems to be an event involving Jean. It turns out these doll characters made fun of Miss Bickelbonger's camel toe, and in her embarrassment she fell out of a window, but because one of the dolls, Mr. Sweater, didn't like that they made fun of her, he wasn't invited to one of the doll gatherings. And the murderer was Mr. Sweater's sister, who was just trying to look out for Mr. Sweater. So obviously, this is about Jean and Louise, and the reveal, I think, is ridiculously sweet. It turns out that Louise and Miss Bizzlebender both overheard kids making fun of Miss Bizzlebender's camel toe. Jean ended up defending her, and then the mean, childish aftermath from those kids.
Hey, are you gonna invite Jean to your gathering?
Yeah, I don't know. He's kind of a goody two-shoes.
This is just such a great Jean and Louise episode. It showcases how kind and good-natured Jean is, and then also how Louise genuinely looks up to her older brother and wishes that she could be more like him.
And it's the exact opposite of what you did. You just said the nice, decent thing without even thinking about it.
But it also really delves into Louise's struggles to be open about herself and her actions and how she's feeling. This was something we also saw really well explored in Bridge Over Troubled Rudy. Louise wanted to tell her brother the truth and how proud she is of him, but didn't have the words to do it, so she set up this elaborate murder mystery doll play.
An explanation, and an apology, and a compliment, using murder.
This is just a really, really wholesome episode, especially for one that involves so much doll murder. It's probably one of my favorites on this entire list. A really fun, spooky way to explore these characters and their relationships, and a great example of what makes Bob's so good at these Halloween stories. So, there you have it, all 12 Bob's Burgers Halloween episodes so far. Truly some of the best stuff the show has to offer, and in such a wide variety too. They always manage to layer these really great horror ideas over their Bob's Burgers world in a way that really lends to what makes the show special, whether that's the realism of the world or the nuances of the characters, and they do so with wildly creative intricacies when transposing those ideas into each other. Comment below with your favorite Bob's Burgers Halloween episode, tell me why it's your favorite, or or just rank them all. Happy Halloween, everybody. Bob's Burgers and Thanksgiving episodes. A pair as perfect as turkey and stuffing, gravy and mashed potatoes, holiday dinners and political arguments with your weirdest uncle. As I covered previously with their Halloween episodes, Bob's Burgers is just top tier when it comes to holiday-themed episodes. But the creme de la creme, at least according to the majority of the fan base, are the Thanksgiving episodes. And when you really dive into what makes this show special, I think the reason for that is pretty clear. So for the holiday this year, I wanted to lay down exactly why I'm so thankful for Bob's Burgers Thanksgiving episodes.
The cranberry sauce. We're having mashed potatoes.
Over the past 15 seasons, Bob's Burgers has released 11 Thanksgiving episodes. For some reason, they've actually skipped out on the past couple seasons, which is unusual, but hopefully that means they'll just come back with a really strong entry next year. Much like the Halloween episodes, fans absolutely love Bob's Thanksgiving episodes, probably most out of all of their holiday-themed episodes, which is saying a lot. And after watching all 11 of these stories back to back, it's clear to me exactly why Bob's most celebrated holiday episodes take place on Turkey Day. Thanksgiving is the holiday that most perfectly embodies the things that make Bob's Burgers a great show. It is a major food-based holiday that focuses on family coming together and being there for each other. Is there anything more perfectly representative of Bob's Burgers? It is a perfect circumstance to create familial conflicts, food-based humor, and of course to showcase Bob's obsessive, food-based tendencies run amok. Not to mention the series has established some incredibly funny running bits over the course of these 11 episodes, and they really just get funnier each and every year. One might even call them Thanksgiving traditions. So let's get into Bob's first Thanksgiving episode from season 3.
Thanking us for thanking you.
Glenn.
Kill the turkey.
Bob's very first Thanksgiving episode wastes no time establishing some of the most important through lines across their Turkey Day stories, immediately opening on what would become their first yearly tradition, Bob talking to and responding as the turkey he plans to cook.
Hey, Bob, what about me?
Oh, yeah, sorry, I didn't see you there.
The first thing they make sure to focus on is that Thanksgiving is super important to Bob. It's his absolute favorite holiday, and given the focus on family and food, that totally tracks. But Bob takes this maybe a little far with his borderline creepy obsession with his turkeys.
I hope he waits to get it home before he stuffs it.
But it also establishes that Bob doesn't really realize that he's the only one in the family who is this into Thanksgiving. He sort of transposes his own obsession onto his family and then gets a hard dose of reality.
Check the rankings. It goes my birthday, Christmas, Halloween,
Easter,
Hanukkah,
snow day, amateur night.
Okay, that's
Veterans Day.
And that sets the stage for a really perfect Bob's Burgers Thanksgiving dilemma. Mr. Fischoeder makes a ridiculous proposition to the Belchers for Linda and the kids to play act as his own family because he's trying to woo a woman who only shows interest when she's a homewrecker. Linda loves acting, the kids think it sounds fun, and none of them care about Thanksgiving as much as Bob.
Now, our job tonight is to fool the woman of my dreams into believing that we are a loving, happy, nuclear family that she can destroy.
Bob would tag along as their chef and prepare their Thanksgiving meal, and in exchange, the Belchers would receive 5 months of free rent. Now, you can probably see why this is a perfect Bob's plot. The Belchers own a struggling business, and so this is basically an offer that Bob cannot refuse. 5 months rent is a lot of money, so Bob is forced to give up something that is incredibly important to him so they can continue to make ends meet. Additionally, it's a proposal that not only separates Bob from his family, but also forces them into roles where they have to actively ignore the family traditions that are so important to Bob. It is an absolutely bizarre scenario, but it so perfectly eats into Bob's insecurities while also exacerbating the Belchers' biggest issues. Pitch perfect crafting of a silly circumstance. And en route, they establish what would become another amazing Bob's giving tradition, Linda singing silly Thanksgiving songs.
No.
Pass the cranberry sauce. We're having mashed potatoes.
I know I also played that clip in the intro, but it is too good not to play again. Even though Bob agrees to this entire Thanksgiving charade, he's still fully intent on secretly having a Belcher family Thanksgiving within the fake one. Sadly, Mr. Fischoeder's gamification of the charade prevents the Belcher kids from caring about this at all. They all brush off their holiday traditions with Bob, leaving him alone to drink absinthe and talk to his turkey.
Remember, Bob, it's all an act.
Thanks, Lance. You've been my rock through all this. I love you.
This does, however, lead to what is easily one of my favorite sequences in all of Bob's Burgers history. Bob dreams hallucinates an incredibly faithful parody of the My Neighbor Totoro tree-growing dream sequence. Honestly, a ridiculously ambitious thing to animate in the Bob's Burgers art style, and while obviously nothing is going to look as good as the OG, it's hard not to be impressed with what they pulled off here. Honestly, the entire conceit of the charade is such a funny idea, and Shelby, the woman Fish Odor fancies, is such a fun character. Being so explicitly excited about being the other woman is ridiculously funny.
You are so married. So gosh damn married.
What I love most about this episode premise is that while you could argue that it's sort of about Bob selling himself out, you could also argue that he was making a huge sacrifice for his family, forgoing his most important holiday desires so that he can give them a fun play-acting Thanksgiving and with a little added security in their business with those 5 months rent. And being there in real substantial ways for your family is kind of a huge part of Thanksgiving, right? However, he sort of undercuts this sacrifice with his absinthe-driven toast to the family that basically ruins the entire charade. And what better way to end a Thanksgiving episode than with a turkey hunt, as Bob runs off with Lance and Shelby literally hunts him down. Insane ending. But it's this wild circumstance that knocks some sense into the Belchers, realizing that they really shoved Bob's favorite day of the year to the side for their own self-fulfillment.
Sorry we ruined your Thanksgiving, Dad.
We were jerks.
This isn't my favorite Bob's Giving episode, but it's such a great start to the series. It immediately establishes some of the funniest running traditions while building out a conflict that not only exemplifies the most important aspects of Thanksgiving, but the most important aspects of Bob's Burgers. Plus, it is just hilarious.
I respect myself too much not to be the other woman.
Wow, you guys are insane.
A ding, a ding.
Oh, what's that sound?
It's the gravy boat.
In the incredibly titled Turkey in a Can, we not only build on the same familial themes prevalent in the first Bob's Burgers Thanksgiving episode, but we get a sort of spooky mystery story. One thing Bob's is pretty great at is applying other sort of tones and tropes to already themed episodes. While a mystery might typically be associated with Halloween, it also fits perfectly with the story here, which actually takes place in the week leading up to Thanksgiving. Gail is staying with the Belchers, and Bob is already prepping his turkey well in advance. And one night in, this happens.
What the? Oh my god.
No!
As you might expect, this sends Bob into full paranoia, desperate to find out who is responsible for canning his beloved turkey. Most of the family thinks it's Louise, but nobody admits to the canning, and they use this premise really, really well. Not only does it send the Thanksgiving-obsessed Bob spiraling, but we get fun detective-y deduction sequences.
Or maybe Linda. Oh, sweet Linda. A long-suffering wife stuck in a bad marriage.
Oh, poor thing.
Though the theatricality here was mostly just meant to try and clear her own name and throw accusations everywhere else, but this show does such a great job highlighting the kids' imaginations in these wild circumstances. Of course, none of this helps Bob, who cannot help but take this as seriously as anything he's ever taken seriously.
I guess I'll just never trust any of you again, forever, for as long as I live.
And oh boy, do they escalate this in such a fun way. Bob obviously continues to prep turkeys for Thanksgiving, and every night, the toilet drop happens again. It's a serial turkey canner. What is so ingenious about this plot is that it pretty explicitly pits Bob against his family, once again at this familial-focused holiday. Bob is so focused on the food preparation aspect of Thanksgiving that he forgets who he's cooking for. And as the turkey toileting happens over and over, he trusts his family less and less, growing resentful. He even cooks up a decoy turkey, putting one in the fridge and another downstairs in the restaurant to try and throw off the culprit, and he only tells Linda. Honestly, side note, one of my favorite things about Bob's Burgers is that even in the middle of this big silly storyline about a turkey continually getting dropped in the toilet, they give us these really genuine moments between characters. Bob and Linda are such a funny couple who really love each other, and even while Bob is spiraling, this is on display.
Oh, I really do need deodorant.
Yeah, you really do.
Woo,
wow.
I stink. Put your face in it. Come on, put your face in it.
But even this decoy turkey does not work. That night, there is a double canning, and Bob decides he's just gonna make a bad day of turkey because he doesn't want to ruin his favorite holiday. Okay, this episode also has this absolutely hysterical B story where, since Bob's turkeys keep getting canned, he has to keep going to the store to get new ones. And at first, the guy at the meat counter sort of makes fun of Bob and belittles him for not being able to cook his turkey, but eventually he starts to think think that Bob is actually coming there to see him.
Oh my God, we're doing this.
No, we're not.
Hey, what do you want to do?
I don't.
You want to go to the beach? Huh?
No, maybe. Wait, I'm straight. I mean, I'm mostly straight.
This is another example of this show just finding some hilarious nugget of comedy in a very human subplot. It's born out of the circumstances of the episode, but otherwise just has nothing to do with the rest of the story. It's all completely separate. The guy eventually decides he wants to leave his boyfriend and run away with Bob, all through these continued meat counter interactions, and it is just so funny.
Who am I kidding? You're out of my league. It would never work.
What are you talking about?
I really gotta go.
I'm gonna see you tomorrow.
This always stuck in my mind as one of the funniest Bob's Burgers Thanksgiving plot lines, and it ironically only takes place over like a few minutes in the middle of an episode that's about something entirely different. This thing also has a shockingly satisfying conclusion as well, really honing back in on the familial themes. Since he's lost so much sleep over the turkeys, Bob falls asleep at their Thanksgiving dinner, and in front of everyone, he sleepwalks the turkey over to the toilet and sits it down, canning it himself. As it turns out, he was dreaming about toilet training Tina and was acting out the motions with the turkey as though it were Tina.
Oh, it's kind of sweet. Oh my God, there goes the stuffing. Oh God, oh God.
I love what this represents as well. If you look at how this episode started, Bob was really prioritizing his own plans for Thanksgiving over any of his family's Thanksgiving desires. Sort of the inverse of last season. Tina really wanted to sit at the adults table and Bob wasn't having it. And his hyper obsession with cooking and preparing the turkey was putting a wedge between him and his family. And while that wedge was driven further and further the more times that turkey went into that toilet, the culprit was ironically Bob's own subconscious reminding him of what's most important. As you might expect, Bob started out 2 for 2 with Thanksgiving episodes.
Aw, I love my little family.
Much like the previous Thanksgiving episode, Dawn of the Peck loops in a whole additional vibe/tone and layers it on top of the Thanksgiving story. This one, even more than the mystery aspect of last season, feels like a full-on honorary Halloween episode, basically turning a massive gaggle of disgruntled turkey, geese, and ducks into holiday zombies. Imagine Hitchcock's The Birds, but it's all the stupidest looking birds, which ends up being a far cry from Linda's expectations.
It's gonna be like the running of the bulls, but cute and safe.
Basically, this year Linda is doing the Turktacular Turkey Trot, and the kids want to go to the accompanying festival, which, as you might expect, puts Bob in a really sour mood, given that Thanksgiving is his favorite holiday.
Well, fine, go. But you know what? I am not making dinner.
He's taking this pretty well.
No, you're crying.
So this thing plays out with what are initially 2 completely separate stories before they merge in a really satisfying way at the end. In one half, it's the events of the Turktacular Turkey Day Festival, and in the other, Bob just having the time of his life being alone at home.
Pretty good. Pretty good. I'll try right over left now. Yep. Also good.
And this relaxed day at home is the perfect juxtaposition to the chaos that unleashes at the turkey trot. As it turns out, what was supposed to be 300 turkeys is actually a mix of turkeys, geese, and ducks who are all incredibly disgruntled. As soon as the trot begins, chaos reigns. This not only causes huge mobs of panicked people, but traps the Belcher kids on the Egg Scrambler ride with Andy, Ollie, and Rudy. Most of the episode plays out like a Bob's Burgers brand of thriller/horror film. The kids have to escape an out-of-control spinning ride, and then they have to flee the wharf without being attacked by these angry birds. No, not those angry birds, these angry birds. Unsurprisingly, the whole bird scenario was the fault of the fish odor's negligence, and as per usual, they have very little interest in fixing the problem they caused.
I mean, they were screaming when I closed the gate, so I don't think so. But who's gonna believe them, right?
Oh, we're still recording.
Oh!
This episode has so many fun and funny moments. The entire stuck on the spinny ride subplot is really creative and ends with one of my favorite regular-sized Rudy moments in the entire show. Linda, Mickey, and Teddy are all hilarious in this kind of panic-ridden situation, and Bob's fun day home and obliviousness to the entire scenario plays out perfectly. After some day whiskey and singing Donna Summer, Bob realizes he is not being true to himself. So he goes to the store to get some stuff to prep a Thanksgiving dinner despite what he told his family. He's just too tipsy to realize that the entire town has been overrun by angry poultry. So the 2 plots just merge perfectly. After the gang actually makes it home, they realize they have to go save Bob at the grocery store. And Teddy's explanation of the pecking order comes back in a hilarious resolution where Linda starts pecking the birds to achieve dominance.
I'm the alpha turkey. Yeah, that's what I thought. Go stuff each other.
Even though this episode is decidedly less Thanksgiving than most of these, it still does find a way to hone in on the familial aspect. Bob realizes he still wants to cook for his family, and that family goes way out of their way to risk the zombie birds and save Bob. Plus, this very funny and touching Thanksgiving toast.
Here's to Linda, queen of the turkeys. She really knows how to peck people.
While this one does deviate from the Thanksgiving theme a bit and ventures more into scaratory, it absolutely stands shoulder to shoulder with their best.
Wait, no one wants turkey?
Not
so much.
Never, ever again.
There you go.
One thing that Bob's really takes advantage of in these Thanksgiving episodes is the versatility of the holiday as a setting. November really allows the writers full flexibility to use a variety of weather circumstances. Where many are typical fall weather, or even warm enough for a turkey trot like the previous season, this year they opted for the occasional reality that Thanksgiving takes place during a massive snowstorm. And man, does that snowy setting elevate the stakes in a really fun way, once again finding something new to put that wedge between Bob and his favorite holiday. This is also when they finally bring back the Bob's talks to his turkeys tradition.
Look at you. You don't even know how beautiful you are. That's what makes you so beautiful.
And of course, more Linda Thanksgiving songs. God, how could you ever get enough of these?
It's Thanksgiving, Thanksgiving for everybody, except for Europeans.
Alongside the big snowstorm conflict, this episode makes another really smart narrative decision for a Thanksgiving episode, putting a focus on an extended family member. Obviously, Thanksgiving is a time where families come together, and sometimes that puts you in close quarters with aunts or uncles or in-laws that you maybe aren't as fond of. And while Bob absolutely loves his family, he always struggles a bit with Linda's family. This episode puts Gail at the forefront, making Bob's exasperation with Linda's sister pretty clear.
She also said she can't use toothpaste because she's afraid she'll get addicted.
Despite this, Bob opts to drive through the snowstorm to pick up Gail, who sprained her ankle. I do love that even though it's made clear that Bob is not a huge fan of Gail, he does what's best for his family, protecting Linda here from making the trip since she's not a very good driver in the snow. And the combination of Gail's eccentricities and the ongoing snowstorm shoves that aforementioned wedge between Bob and his precious Thanksgiving. Gail takes so long to get ready that by the time they go to leave, Bob's car has been buried by a snowplow. With no way to get the car free and Gail hobbling on crutches, the only solution is for Bob to pull Gail in an inflatable kiddie pool like it's a sled. Man, I cannot express how much I love this premise. Absolutely ridiculous, and such a perfectly crafted metaphor. The sister-in-law Bob dislikes is literally the baggage dragging behind him that's preventing him from enjoying his favorite holiday. And this scenario also leads to our B story this episode.
Your father's pulling your aunt through the snow because he's a hero. We're all gonna have to cook stuff.
Bob attempts to coach his family through the remaining cooking he has to do, which of course goes poorly, while he deals with Gail in the snowstorm. The kids just make whatever they want, while Linda absolutely struggles with the turkey, butchering it really. The escalation here is incredibly funny as well, with the reveal that Gail was faking her injury the entire time.
Oh yeah, she does that.
Bob then injures himself while trying to save Gail's cat from a tree, and their roles reverse as Gail drags Bob the remainder of the way home, which is a pretty nice resolution. I think this show just has such a good handle on familial relationships, even beyond the nuclear fam. Even though it's exacerbated by these ridiculous circumstances, Bob and Gail have an incredibly realistic dynamic, where they're sort of forced to put up with and help each other despite their differences. It's a nice look at the family that comes with the family you choose, and I think it ends on a lovely note.
Bob, today you proved that no matter what, family is always there for each other, even when they drive you crazy.
Though they ultimately reveal that even Gail's fake injury was spurred on by her own complete misunderstanding of a situation, bafflingly believing that Mr. Frond broke up with her.
He said he was going to visit his aunt for Thanksgiving.
Wait, what? That's all he said?
Gail, he's probably actually visiting his aunt for Thanksgiving.
Gail might be funny, but I do not think that I would have the patience that the Belchers have. But Bob's continues to deliver great family-themed Thanksgiving episodes in new flavors each and every year. To change things up for this year's Thanksgiving episode, Bob's opted to do a school-focused story in the week leading up to the holiday itself, which is a great way to feed us something new for Turkey Day. Since the holiday is typically so family-focused, we don't often get to see the Belchers' classmates in these kinds of stories. This is also an episode that really hinges on Louise, up to one of her usual schemes at the expense of the eternally earnest Tina. Louise hates that the day before Thanksgiving, they always have to sit through Mr. Frahn's Thanksgiving plays, so she cooks up a plan. She convinces Mr. Frahn to let her produce the play with the intention of pushing it over the edge.
What if the day before Thanksgiving play is so offensive that it gets shut down? We'd all go home early!
Unfortunately, her plan for this is to convince Tina that she should genuinely turn one of her erotic holiday friend fictions into the school play. While this episode isn't quite as family-focused as some of the other Thanksgiving stories, it does deliver a great arc for Tina and a great lesson for Louise. Tina's entire play is called The Quirky Turkey, a thinly veiled story about herself, focusing on a turkey who is self-conscious because she's been referred to as quirky.
Tina, you're so quirky.
She's right, you are.
You are.
You are.
Oh my god, you really are.
Oh my god, she's like so quirky.
There are some pretty sad moments in this one. Tina thinks they found this great lead for the play who can sing, but Louise convinces Tina that she has to play the quirky turkey. So while Tina thinks that her sister is supporting her and believes in her, it's actually because Louise wants the play to go as badly as possible. This is definitely one of those episodes where Louise sets her sights on something selfishly and doesn't really care who she tramples to get it. Though, even though the entire cast is initially pretty excited for the play itself, they all mostly jump on board with Louise's half-day plan so they can spend the afternoon how they want to.
And I want to go to the mall that day to get leggings.
Yeah, for her legs.
Yes.
And Louise's plan itself is actually insane. She wants to use an air compressor to launch turkey gizzards and giblets out of the papier-mâché turkey heads, covering the audience and hopefully sending everybody home. But when it actually happens, the reality of that plan sets in.
This isn't gonna scar anyone for life, right?
I'm gonna throw up!
I think what I love most about this resolution is that despite the fact that Tina has been wronged by Louise the entire episode, she actually steps up and helps her. She A, displays genuine confidence in herself, pushing her play over the finish line successfully, and B, uses Louise's horrifying plan to improve the ending of the story, allowing the audience to appreciate it instead of be traumatized by it, and letting Louise off the hook for her selfish behavior.
I've got the guts. Do you have the guts to be yourself? You've got the guts, huh?
I'm not gonna lie, at first I did not see how they were gonna dig themselves out of this hole, but Tina's Guts song was wildly satisfying. And I guess the familial themes comes with Tina helping out her sister even when she doesn't deserve it. This is a really fun episode. It's maybe not my favorite of the Bob's Giving lineup because I'm a little more partial to the more overt family themes, but setting this at school around a play continues their streak of giving us variety in the Thanksgiving stories.
My parents are the two halves of the waffle maker.
That makes you the waffle!
For Season 8, Bob's once again gives us a change of scenery for Thanksgiving, bringing the Belchers over to Teddy's house to help him last minute prepare to have guests for the holiday. And while I love the overt familial stuff in these Thanksgiving episodes, I also really love the decision to focus on Teddy this year, largely because, as non-Belchers go, Teddy definitely spends the most time with Bob, Linda, and the kids. He's definitely the most featured non-family member in the entire show, and this man absolutely adores the Belchers, particularly Bob. So it's nice to have a Thanksgiving episode where the Belchers spend time with one of those friends who basically is family. It actually starts the day before Thanksgiving with Teddy panicking about his family coming over, showcasing Bob's usual tunnel vision towards his own Thanksgiving cooking plans.
Teddy, I don't know. We closed early, and I still barely have enough time to do everything I have to do for our Thanksgiving. I have a new brine I'm trying, and I was thinking about spatchcocking.
This is definitely primarily a Teddy episode, and I love the insight it gives us into his life, revealing his hoarding tendencies, which is maybe the least surprising reveal about Teddy in the show. The guy has real clear characterization.
Shouldn't we call it Doctor or a TV show?
So while Linda and the kids basically try to Marie Kondo Teddy's stuff, Bob tries to give Teddy a step-by-step guide on preparing his Thanksgiving meal.
Thanksgiving is the most important meal of the year, which makes the turkey like the king of foods.
This goes reasonably well despite Teddy's clear discomfort, but with the Belchers spending so much time helping Teddy get ready for his family to come over, it prevents Bob from being able to spend the time he wants to on his own Thanksgiving. And Bob, forever the Thanksgiving obsessive perfectionist, is pretty disappointed by his own meal prep, which sets them up perfectly when Teddy absolutely fails to follow Bob's instructions.
You know what this means?
Please don't say we
have to go to Teddy's to help him with his Thanksgiving so I can redeem myself.
Oh, God.
And while this new prep goes well on Bob's end, Teddy is still reeling from the anti-hoarding of his house. They end up finding him out in the dumpster tending to his former treasure, now trash. And this is definitely where the episode shines. I mentioned that it gives us a lot of insight into Teddy as a character, and this is where we get the real substance.
Well, when I was a kid, I'd just sit between my parents so they wouldn't argue so much.
So Teddy, down in the dumpster, is trying to fix all of the things he's hoarded before they're hauled away. Not because he needs these things, but because the process of fixing is how he copes, and it represents something he sees as a failure in his life.
I'm a fixer. I fix things. I've always been a fixer. I'm gonna fix that waffle making soon.
The big reveal here is that Teddy's entire career and all of these tendencies stem from the trauma of his parents not working out, which he perceives as his own failure because he was the one who always sat between them to stop them from fighting. So his stress about all of the hoarding junk being hauled away isn't necessarily about the stuff itself. The trash man is a ticking clock counting down to Teddy's next failure to fix things, an extension of that trauma from his parents. This is really great stuff. Bob's truly has such human characters, even though they are so quirky and ridiculous. And this insight into what makes Teddy tick is one of their patented emotional and heartfelt revelations. And I think the episode ends on an even better note. His family can't make dinner, and so Teddy eats with the Belchers, who go ahead and have a second Thanksgiving dinner so that they can spend some time with Teddy. And Teddy gets to spend the holiday with his chosen family.
Thank you guys for all your help with my stuff, and putting up with my stuff, and making stuffing. It means a lot.
That makes you the waffle. Fix it. We're saving the bird this year.
Where they've impressively managed to find new locations for the Thanksgiving episodes across the first 8 seasons, Season 9 continues this trend by taking Thanksgiving on the road. This is easily one of my favorite Bob's Giving episodes because it is so unique, but even though it swerves off in a different direction, it of course starts with Bob talking to his turkey.
So dumb, treating the turkey like it's a person.
Yeah, idiots. Wait, but don't you...
Shh, no, shh.
In this one, the Belchers are going to the town turkey pardoning the day before Thanksgiving, but Bob is obviously always focused on the food, remembering that they need to stop for cranberries on the way home. Honestly, I think maybe the hardest I've laughed at Bob sitting on his Thanksgiving meal high horse was this drive-by jab at Linda's mom.
I know you ate that sugary canned cranberry slop at your grandmother's that one year because she doesn't care about anything.
But the core of this episode is that at the pardoning ceremony, the kids overhear the deputy mayor's assistant revealing that they aren't saving the pardoned turkey, Drew P. Neck, at all. They are going to kill him.
Now I have to drive a turkey to a slaughterhouse because my career in politics is going really great.
I love these stakes. It basically turns this year's episode into an ongoing chase, and it's another Thanksgiving story that challenges Bob. Bob absolutely does not care at all about this pardoned turkey. In fact, that turkey sort of represents the opposite of what Bob cares about most when it comes to Thanksgiving. Bob loves turkeys, but the dead ones, the ones that can talk to him before he cooks them up with some new gimmick each year, not the living ones with the derpy faces. But, at his kids' insistence, Bob realizes that they really should save this turkey from his slaughterhouse fate, even though it is not his usual MO. There are some fun twists and turns in this one, and I particularly loved that the moment they released Drew P. Neck into the wild, they realized they put him in more danger.
Guys, I'm pretty sure that's coyotes.
Oh my god.
This episode is maybe a little meandering, but I don't even think that's a bad thing in this instance. It feels like the twists and turns are worth it for the adventure of it all, and it leads to this great Louise moment.
Get the hell away from Drew P. Neck, you sons of bitches! Ah!
Aside from the fun of this entire turkey saving sequence, can I just shout out these gorgeous fall backgrounds and locations? Some of my favorite looking scenery in the entire show for sure. Beautifully vibrant fall colors. And the resolution of the episode brings Drew P. Neck to the same farm from Stand By Gene with the two-butted goat, a pretty fitting callback. I think comedy-wise, the funniest thing about this episode is just the complete incompetence of the deputy mayor, and the fact that he tries so hard to use his role to be imposing, but absolutely fails at every step.
Oh, they printed it.
Oh, I guess Cunningham doesn't have as much pull at the paper as he thought he did.
Yeah, he's not the mayor.
But I think the best part of this episode, in terms of the whole familial Thanksgiving messaging, comes from Bob's actions here. Though it was so fundamentally opposed to what his usual Thanksgiving motivations are, the fact that Bob helped that turkey and fulfilled his kids' desires actually led to an amazing experience for him, getting the freshest cranberries from that farmer's cranberry bog. Just a top-tier Bob experience that only happened because he decided to push his own Thanksgiving plans to the side for his family. Great stuff.
You're a true gift from heaven, and I love you.
This is definitely a candidate for my favorite Bob's Giving episode. Just fully leans into the themes I love most from these holiday stories. And it all once again starts with Bob's singular hyper-focus on that Thanksgiving meal. This year, Bob has finally made it to the top of the wait list for what he believes is the best turkey that money can buy.
I'm not driving any faster with a Riverbrook Lake Farms heritage turkey in the car, Len.
Can I just shout out how funny the name Riverbrook Lake Farms is? 3 bodies of water and 1 farm name. Great writing. But once again, Bob's obsessive focus on a Thanksgiving dilemma leads him to really neglect the family that is truly the most important part of the holiday. And even before the dilemma, he's pretty dismissive of Tina's one Thanksgiving plan for the family, the gratitude tree, where everybody writes things they're grateful for on the leaves.
Leaf ceremony?
Yeah, we read our leaves aloud and take turns taping them to the branches.
This sets the stage for what is one of my favorite moments in any of these Thanksgiving episodes, but we'll get there. The major dilemma is forecasted in the very good title this year. The Belcher's gas is out on Thanksgiving and won't be fixed for a couple of days. Perfect timing now that Bob has his never-frozen, top-of-the-line Riverbrook Farms heritage turkey. And after much panicking and desperation, Bob devises one of his dumbest plans ever. He builds a fire in the alley so he can slowly cook his turkey over it, which he can only do with his family's full help and attention.
We have to keep this bird hot for only 4 or 5 hours.
What?
5 hours? We'll be fully grown women by then.
This silly-ass plan has so many funny twists and turns. The fire department shows up and tells Bob to put the fire out, and honestly, while I do understand it's their job, they are really rude about it given that the city messed up their gas and ruined Thanksgiving, but Bob just fully ignores them anyways, intent on finishing his turkey. And he's willing to burn literally anything so he can cook this turkey, forcing the kids to continually retrieve more fuel for the fire. This leads to what I think is a really great moment that showcases Bob's shortcomings in this scenario. The kids go to the park to find more wood, and when there are shockingly few sticks, they put a ton of effort to roll this massive log over to the fire, which obviously is not going to help Bob because it's way too big to burn, but he shows absolutely no appreciation for the effort his kids put forth.
You guys were supposed to get sticks. Where are the sticks?
This is a mega stick. What's happening?
Would you like a suggestion where to stick this log?
Bob's increasing desperation and lack of appreciation for his family's time and help is really what makes this episode big climax hit so well. As Bob desperately tries to keep the embers lit and keep his turkey dreams alive, Tina hands him one last thing to burn: her gratitude tree.
What the hell am I saying? Oh my God, I've gone nuts, haven't I?
Just a little. Or a lot.
I'm not gonna burn your tree, Tina.
Oh, thank God.
Bob's Thanksgiving tunnel vision is obviously a major motif across these episodes, but I think this one might be my favorite. Bob is literally willing to burn anything around him to make sure his special turkey is ready for T-Day. An apt metaphor for that aforementioned tunnel vision, honestly. And it's not until he almost burns the gratitude tree that he realizes he himself has truly been lacking in gratitude. Oh, and then the fire department comes back and he knocks the turkey straight into the fire, burning it to a crisp. And it isn't until Bob verbally acknowledges what is most important that his Thanksgiving wish is actually granted.
I am grateful for all of you, my family.
Aw, family.
Huh.
I mean, that one's kind of obvious.
Once Bob goes to throw the turkey out, he peels back the burnt skin and realizes that it is perfectly cooked.
Oh my God, it was delicious.
Gimme.
Let me try.
It's nice when these episodes wait until the characters have learned their lesson to reward them with the thing they wanted all along. This is a top tier Bob's Giving episode.
Turkey, I need you beside me.
This is a wildly different Thanksgiving entry for Bob's Burgers, opting for anthology storytelling. The Simpsons is obviously known for doing these on Halloween with their Treehouse of Horrors, but what makes Bob's Burgers anthology stories so special is that they tend to find incredibly unique ways to frame these stories, and also do a great job making the stories feel like an extension of whichever character is telling them. This one kinda nails both, but first it starts by just giving the quickest and most efficient plot establishing dialogue ever.
Oh, and by the way, Anyway, Gene has the stomach flu and he's barfing and has crazy diarrhea, so he's spending Thanksgiving in the apartment bathroom, and we all have to use the bathroom in the restaurant.
I also think giving Gene the focus for this Thanksgiving episode is a really nice change of pace that I'm surprised we didn't see happen sooner, considering how much that kid adores food. Being too sick to eat Bob's Thanksgiving spread is a fate worse than death for Gene. In fact, he even serenades his family about it.
What's that hiding in your hole? Some stuffing for my heart and soul.
I have got to give Eugene Merman props for this singing performance here. Gene sings a lot in this show, but for this song in particular, you can really hear how damn sad he is through his vocals. Really impressive and a really great Thanksgiving conflict for Gene. But this also works really well with Bob's Thanksgiving obsession, showing that he maybe took Gene for granted when nobody else in the family is particularly jazzed about his quote-unquote innovative menu stuff.
I really wish Gene wasn't sick. He was so excited about all this new food.
So the framing device for the anthology stories here is that Louise and Tina are trying to tell Gene stories that will make him hate food, so that he isn't so bummed about missing out on Thanksgiving dinner. And they do this by basically combining food with old action movies, in what I can really only describe as an excuse to make the sweatiest food puns, which, let's be honest, is Bob's Burgers' entire MO, so this tracks. Louise starts off with a parody of Predator, which is of course called The Breadator, in which Bob plays a predator made out of bread who also turns his victims into bread. It's incredibly silly, but pretty funny. I particularly love the detail that the Predator's butt is made out of hot cross buns. That's good stuff. Tina's sweaty action movie pun is Pear Force One, a parody of Air Force One, where a group of pears hijack the president's plane. But I'm gonna be honest, there was a huge missed opportunity here to call these pear terrorists terrorists. This one had some of my biggest laughs in the entire episode too, like when President Gene was worried he wouldn't be able to watch the Kaminsky Method on his flight.
Of course, sir. We have all the episodes streaming on VHS because it's 1997.
This story also has Gene insisting that his wife in the story needs to be Linda, which is very weird, but also very Gene. He really loves his mom. I do think that the highlight of the episode is how the last story ties everything to the story of the framing device. Bob realizes that Gene ate this 2-week-old chicken parm in the fridge, so he doesn't have stomach flu, he has food poisoning. And he wrote his action movie parody entirely around this, Parmageddon.
We need to go up there and blow up that big piece of chicken parm.
Basically the plot of Armageddon, but instead of Bruce Willis sacrificing himself to blow up the asteroid, Gene has to eat an old chicken parm the size of Texas. It's a nice way for Bob to reveal to Gene that he knows what happened, and Gene fesses up.
I was embarrassed that I basically ate garbage. I just love to eat.
Bob's Burgers is generally pretty impressive with its anthology stories, but they still to me are usually among my least favorite episodes, mostly just due to personal taste. And even though this one did a great job delivering an emotional character-focused story through these action food movie parodies, it's a bit lower on my Bob's Giving favorites list. But I think that really just speaks to how great these episodes are, because it still delivered some really lovely family moments.
And as soon as you pass that sip test, I'll eat dinner with you.
In the tradition of finding new locations for their Thanksgiving specials, this year the Belchers go to volunteer at the old folks' home before preparing their own Thanksgiving meal, which is a pretty fun setting for a holiday. And miraculously, Bob is given the opportunity to prepare Thanksgiving dinner for the entire home when their chef goes into labor, which might sound like a nightmare surprise for most, but this is Bob we're talking about.
Hi, Kitchen. I'm Bob. Let's get into it. No, that sounded lame. Sorry, Kitchen.
It's okay.
I love how they started to expand Bob's talking as the turkey compulsion beyond the turkey itself. In this one, he talks as the kitchen and also a whole array of side dishes. But this episode splits the family into 3 groups. Linda gets stuck with Sergeant Bosco and his mother, which I have to admit is kind of the odd story out. It has some funny moments, but it's pretty thin, and I think it was mostly meant to separate Linda from Bob. Tina, Gene, and Louise plan to help Zeke put on an in-person Thanksgiving Day parade for the folks at the home since their cable has gone out, but Louise gets roped into helping Bob prepare the food, which is honestly such a perfect circumstance to build familial conflict on Thanksgiving, given Bob's hyper-obsessive food tendencies on Tea Day. Bob and Louise have a really fun dynamic that creates great conflict, because they're both a little bit controlling in different ways. Obviously, this comes out of Bob most for Thanksgiving food preparation, but Louise in general doesn't like to be in situations she doesn't have much control over, which makes her sous chef position really difficult. However, Louise does pretty immediately find something she's stoked to do in the kitchen.
It shoots fire when you press this button.
Let me see.
Louise basically immediately falls in line when the prospect of torching the marshmallow on the sweet potato casserole is put in front of her. Unfortunately, Bob's T-Day tendencies prevent him from being a good teacher, and anytime Louise struggles to do something in the kitchen efficiently, rather than show her a better way, he takes over and just does it for her. Again, I just think this is a perfect way to build conflict between Bob and Louise, who generally have a great relationship, but their personalities still have tendencies that clash pretty substantially. And I'm sure you could guess what exactly brought this food-based conflict to its boiling point.
Captain Casserole reporting for duty.
Oh, it's just that we only get one shot at this, Louise, and if we don't get it right, it's ruined.
I do think that while I love this A story with Bob and Louise, which sets up a perfect familial conflict within a great Thanksgiving scenario, the whole IRL parade B story is maybe a little lacking. It has some pretty funny moments, like Tina play acting as a reporter before the parade, and I love Zeke getting more involved in any story, but it definitely feels like it was lacking impact in the narrative, even in how they tried to sort of merge the A and B stories with Bob's apology. But admittedly, even though it felt like a haphazard combination of these sides of the plot, Bob's apology to Louise is a great moment.
I pictured us bustling around in there, high-fiving with spatulas, but I was way too much of a cook and not enough of a dad.
Man, that is just an all-time great Bob apology. What a good line. I've got to do a video about Bob and Louise's relationship one day, and Bob really makes up for his blunder with this final beat.
Hey, Louise, there's one more thing I need your help with in the kitchen.
What's that?
I'm only slightly torn on this episode because it pairs a B story I'm mostly indifferent to with one of my all-time favorite A stories, but man, that A story is truly special.
3, 2, 1, roll with just one goal.
We have reached the final Bob's Giving entry, at least for now, Season 13's Putz Giving. While this is a very good episode, I do think it maybe strays a bit too far from the Thanksgiving of it all, but it's still great. In this one, Tina is trying to figure out how to ask her parents if she can go to Tammy's bonfire where high school boys will be in attendance. But while trying to bring this up, the family decides to go on an impromptu Thanksgiving Day mini golf excursion so they can take advantage of an expiring coupon.
This is my new home.
I love the way this episode is structured, basically having Tina bounce between the A and B stories, acting as the bridge that connects everything. On one side, Louise and Jean are desperately trying to get their golf balls in 3 holes simultaneously to make this mini golf Yeti's head, arms, and legs all move at the same time. I think what I love about this side of the story is that it is such a kid thing to want to see. It's so inconsequential, but kids are often obsessed with inconsequential stuff like this. And that's what makes the conflict with Tina work so well. As the eldest Belcher, Tina has her eyes set on something that is pointedly more grown up in this episode, going to a bonfire where older kids will be hanging out. While the whole Yeti scheme might have seemed fun to her in any other circumstance, today it feels meaningless and not worth risking getting into trouble as she's trying to stay on Bob and Linda's good side. It's just such a great age-based conflict for the Belcher kids. Of course, Tina's pleas to her parents generally go ignored because that entire B story is focused on Linda chasing the hole-in-one dragon. This B story itself is actually also inconsequential, but it is just so funny. They start off by showing Linda brushing off her own terrible golf skills, faking her score.
I don't think you did, but fine.
No, I did.
And then when she miraculously gets a hole-in-one, she obsessively tries to get another and has a miserable time because of it. It's incredibly silly, but it's vintage Bob and Linda, with Linda just flying off the rails and Bob putting up with it in a dry but funny way.
Yeah, Tommy Two Strokes. Get ready for Linda, look at my hole-in-one.
Just as long as you don't permanently change your name to that.
But where this episode really shines is in Tina's relationship to Louise and Jean, which is obviously going to continue to shift and change as she gets older, but she'll never throw her siblings under the bus. After the pair actually break the Yeti, Tina still comes up with a last-ditch plan to fix it for them, putting her own desires at risk for her sister. It's a really great sentiment, and while it works for a moment and they have a chance to get off scot-free, Louise actually decides to come clean. It's a really nice resolution where Louise grows up a little bit, and then Tina recognizes that she would never want to ruin her relationship with her siblings.
Jean and I shouldn't have been messing with the legs.
It was an accident, and it could have happened to anyone. I mean, dancing Yeti is a lot of moving parts. A lot that can go wrong.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
So while I do think this is just generally a really great episode, with classic Bob and Linda shenanigans and a heartfelt, impactful Tina and Louise story, I do maybe get a little stuck on the fact that it doesn't really feel like it needed to be a Thanksgiving episode. The fact that it takes place on Thanksgiving barely factors in at all outside of Bob trying to get home to cook, and it honestly feels like they could have just written this for any other time of the year. So as a Thanksgiving episode, I sort of dock it a few points, but as a Bob's Burgers episode in general, there's almost nothing to complain about. It's funny, it's heartfelt, and it ends with one of my favorite Tina and Louise moments in the entire show.
Louise, I know we're not always going to want to do the same things, but I'll always have your back.
Same here.
So there it is, all 11 Bob's Burgers Thanksgiving episodes so far. These are fan favorites for a reason. As I mentioned over and over again in the video, they just exemplify the most important core aspects of this show. Familial conflicts where characters learn to appreciate and understand each other better, wrapped in food puns and turkey humor. Really some of the best stuff the series has to offer. Comment below with your favorite Bob's Burgers Thanksgiving episode, why it's your fave, and you know what? Give me your entire ranking. Happy Thanksgiving. As I'm sure you know by now, Bob's Burgers is just the absolute king of holiday-themed episodes. From Halloween to Valentine's Day and everything in between, they just seem to find a way to celebrate each holiday right. And the holiday they've celebrated the most times just so happens to be Christmas. And while many people are maybe a bit more partial to their Thanksgiving stories, personally, I think some of the best episodes in Bob's Burgers history are Christmas-themed. So, as a gift to you this year, I wanted to deep dive into exactly why Bob's Burgers Christmas episodes are such a gift to all of us. Over their 15 seasons, Bob's Burgers has released 14 Christmas-themed episodes, and it seems to be the one holiday that they never skip. And as is true for seemingly every holiday, fans love their Christmas-themed stories. And after watching all 14 episodes in the Bob's Burgers Christmas canon, I do think it's pretty clear why these episodes work. There isn't as consistent of a through line as there is for their Halloween or Thanksgiving episodes, but Christmas really allows the show a perfect outlet to explore these characters. It's a holiday that, at its core, is all about giving and selflessness, but that message, as in real life, often gets lost in the excitement of receiving and celebration. The prospect of getting gifts is inherently a great way to establish selfish conflict for the kids in a way that really challenges them, and the focus on family celebration often creates an outlet for Bob and Linda to need to look outside of their own family unit to feel for others. Some of the best character explorations in the entire show are in these Christmas episodes, so let's start with their first Christmas episode from season 3. Bob's very first Christmas episode is, well, it's a weird one, but it definitely establishes many of the themes we see across the series' slate of Xmas stories, and as is the case in many Bob's episodes, especially this early on, it starts by establishing their struggle to make ends meet during the Christmas season. Even Tina's seemingly easy gift request.
We can't afford any of those things, kids.
Not even a dry erase board?
No, Tina!
So, if they can't even afford a dry erase board, you know things are pretty dire. These Christmas episodes tend to often have a focus on how the family is struggling in some way or another, though the manner of struggle definitely shifts special to special. The Belchers are thrown a little bit of hope when, sadly, Bob's Uncle Ernie dies, but leaves them something in the will. But this is, of course, the Belchers, so it obviously wasn't just a bunch of money.
Storage Unit 39 at the Quincy Avenue, just stow it.
Oh.
And this is where the Christmas theming starts to show its face. Often these episodes put the Belchers or someone in the Belcher family at odds with someone else during the Christmas season. They discover a man named Chet has been living in Uncle Ernie's storage unit, and the guy immediately makes Bob deeply uncomfortable.
You want to come in for a hug?
No.
Linda and the kids want to help put this guy up during the holiday season, but Bob is still so focused on his own seasonal struggles and doesn't really want to let this strange man stay with them. But fitting with that holiday theming, their generosity actually ends up helping them. Chet does this mannequin display in the window, and it starts to attract a ton of new customers. He does a new display every single day, and with the new foot traffic, suddenly, it looks like the Belchers' Christmas might be salvageable.
We might actually be able to afford to buy the kids something nice.
This pretty thoroughly establishes one of the common Bob's Christmas threads, that even when the Belchers are struggling, they're almost karmically rewarded for helping others. The reason for the season and all that. And even though this seems pretty clear from the way putting up Chet is mutually beneficial, Chet's next admission puts Bob so far out of his comfort zone that he struggles to keep up this generosity. He reveals that not only is his lost love Nadine a store display mannequin, but that Chet himself used to be a mannequin as well. The entire Belcher family gets really invested in this love story, except for Bob.
If I wasn't a mannequin, how come I don't know how to use a computer? Explain that, Bob.
Yeah, Dad, explain that.
Bob handwaves not just Chet's claims, but his love for Nadine so thoroughly that it sorta sends Chet spiraling. His final window display basically looks like a murder scene. I really like the way this thing plays out, because the message here is really just about empathy, kindness, and compassion. Whether or not Chet actually was a mannequin sort of doesn't matter here. The Belcher family in general empathizes with his heartbreak and wants to help, while Bob can't bring himself to do it because the story seems so ridiculous to him. And he pays a karmic price for not feeling for this man's emotions. And it isn't until he helps the kids heist Nadine from a local sex shop that karma resets, even though it's all deeply weird and makes Bob wildly uncomfortable. Chet and Nadine reconnect, the display is a success, and then in classic Belcher kid fashion, they even offer to buy Nadine back for Chet. Chet.
Seriously? You're all willing to give up your Christmas presents for Chet?
One of those classic examples of why the Belcher kids are just so damn wholesome. But I love this story because it really exemplifies the whole idea that giving is the reason for the season. Even though the Belchers have their own struggles to make ends meet, this entire bizarre mannequin man gave them unforgettable Christmas experiences. They got to help make these amazing window displays, they got to reunite a long-lost couple and believe in love. It brought much of the community together to celebrate the displays, and the kids even got gifts they were happy with thanks to the junk found at Uncle Ernie's storage unit. It does a great job establishing how, in this show, when the Belchers think of others at Christmas, they're rewarded as well, even though Chet had a few things he maybe should have shared earlier.
We'll probably stay at my place in Manhattan. I have a loft that was being renovated, and I cannot wait to see how it turned out.
What?
If you've watched many of Bob's various holiday episodes, I'm sure you've noticed that they have a tendency to lay some horror/mystery/thriller vibes on non-Halloween episodes. But I think the most impressive thing is that they managed to layer on these spookier tones without betraying the themes that work for whichever holiday they're celebrating, and Season 4's Christmas in the Car is a prime example of this. Funny enough, it starts the day after Halloween, with the inciting incident being that Linda gets a Christmas tree too early, twice, and the family has to go get a last-minute tree on Christmas Eve.
What? Not have a tree on Christmas!
And much like a typical Bob's Thanksgiving dilemma, going to get the tree is gonna mess with Bob's family dinner plans. So right off the bat, Bob's own plans are in jeopardy, which might lead to a rough Christmas for him. But after they get their dinky little Christmas tree from the leftover pile, the real conflict begins. The kids do a terrible job spotting Bob as he backs out of the Christmas lot, and they're nearly annihilated by a giant candy cane truck. And then when they struggle to get the car to move in the snow, Linda makes things worse.
Hey, jackass! Quit honking at my family!
Honestly, this is easily one of my favorite Christmas episodes in Bob's Burgers because the thriller aspect is so successful. The tone, the snowy roads as a location, the bizarre ominous presence of this giant candy cane truck, it's so unique, and there are like at least 3 wildly tense sequences. The first being when Bob tries to pass the truck after their first encounter, and then when it doesn't let him pass, it nearly runs him into an oncoming snowplow. It is thrilling. I also loved when Bob tried to tell the cop at the diner about this experience, and he just does not care at all.
Hello? Are you injured in any way?
This episode basically has Bob out doing something he doesn't want to do, while something important to him is cooking back home, and nobody seems to be bothered at all about what he feels is an unreasonably insane experience. One that continues to get more insane with those other 2 tense sequences, the first being this bridge standoff with the truck, and the next being immediately after this when they hide their car in the trees, and the truck slowly stalks through trying to find them. It's so funny that they managed to make this giant truck driving slowly in this creepy stalking way so damn menacing. But I think the ultimate payoff of the episode has got to be not just one of my favorite comedic climaxes, but one of my favorite emotional and thematic climaxes as well. Bob has basically spent his entire Christmas Eve in his worst nightmare, and yet when this candy cane truck driver shows himself and tries to fight Bob, he kind of realizes he doesn't have it so bad.
I'm about to bang your ass, and you're asking me for help?
Bang my ass?
This is one of my favorite Christmas episode endings for sure. Bob feels so bad for this little guy that rather than escalate the conflict, he kind of just decides to throw him a bone. This dude has all this pent-up frustration and rage for being forced to drive in a candy cane on Christmas, and so Bob is just gonna let him punch him in the stomach.
I think this guy's having a worse Christmas than us. He seems like he really needs this.
I think this hits those Bob's Burgers Christmas themes really well. The entire time, Bob was feeling bad for himself and worried about his own Christmas, and he only realized he was taking that energy out on other people when he was confronted by someone who was doing the same thing. And he realizes that he at least gets to spend his holiday with his family, even if they're driving him a little bit crazy. And even though it's the entire reason they went out, they decide to give this guy their Christmas tree. Also a Dutch baby from the diner.
This is really good. You can't even taste the baby.
This is just a great Christmas episode. I'm definitely partial to when they go the horror route, but they do it without sacrificing the thematic resonance of their Christmas stories. What seems like an awful experience turns into a lesson about appreciating what you have and the people in your life. It's a top-tier Bob's Christmas episode.
Me and my family will be warm tonight.
This has gotta be one of Bob's most talked about Christmas episodes, primarily for that sweet Belcher family lore. It's still only one of a handful of episodes that features Bob's dad, Big Bob, in a meaningful way, and I think it uses their strained relationship to tell a great Christmas story. This year, the major Christmas character conflict, as you might expect, is between Bob and his dad, but they also do a great job giving us the context for that conflict. The episode opens on a flashback to 30 years earlier, and we see Bob was already making his food talk at this point, but this flashback showcases some of the earliest resentment Bob has for his father, at least that we've seen. He was put in charge of Big Bob's restaurant for the afternoon, and when a customer, Henry, orders his regular order, Bob instead makes one of his fancy burgers we now know him for.
Henry, I present to you, baby, you can chive my car burger.
And of course, we see the fallout and source of resentment that would fester for years following when Big Bob shows absolutely no interest in what his son made.
We'll make you a tuna melt. Just everybody shush!
This episode takes place at Big Bob's Christmas party, which Bob hasn't gone to in 7 years. And as these Bob's Burgers Christmas episodes tend to do a great job getting these characters, often Bob, to empathize with other people, using a Christmas episode for this important Bob-father reconciliation is pretty fitting. And they do a great job with it. The first act of the episode really makes you feel for Bob and understand that his dad kinda stifled his creativity, wouldn't let him spread his wings. And they reinforce the conflict with a few flashbacks showcasing that Bob really can't be around his dad for more than 15 minutes.
So you named him Gene, huh? Is it too late to change that?
I'm gonna leave now.
They also don't really go out of their way in this first part to make Big Bob seem empathetic at all, particularly in how he treats his employees.
Went to the hospital because his daughter's having a baby. People can be pretty selfish, I guess.
They even show another flashback to when Bob was 24, probably the point where this rift with his father really started, revealing that Big Bob offered his son the opportunity to co-run the restaurant and was even changing the name to Big Bob's and Son. But obviously, with Bob's festering resentment, this did not go well.
You're so critical. I can't even lift a spatula without you saying I'm doing it wrong.
What I love so much about the way they reveal these origins is that there is undeniable good and bad in how Bob was influenced by his dad. Obviously, what we've seen of their relationship is pretty negative. Big Bob doesn't seem to understand or pay attention to what his son wants, and Bob felt stifled and ignored. But it's also clear that growing up working in a restaurant was what inspired Bob to want to cook, and to do more with cooking than his dad ever would. Linda really instigates by trying to force Bob and Big Bob to make up, suggesting Bob work for his dad since they're short-staffed, and right on cue, Big Bob passive-aggressively insults Bob's cooking in a wildly rude way.
It says grilled cheese on the ticket, but maybe you thought it said burnt toast. I don't know.
Oh my god.
Bob ends up challenging his dad and making that burger for Henry that he didn't get a chance to serve him 30 years earlier, and in a momentarily satisfying victory, Henry tries it and loves it. But I think the real impressive thing about this episode is that they really show it off initially from Bob's perspective, putting you pretty firmly on his side. But then, over the course of the episode, they reveal more and more about Big Bob that, while not making you switch teams, does make you understand and empathize with him a little bit more. During the flashback where Big Bob offers Bob the partnership, you fully understand why Bob turns it down, but you also see that, to Big Bob, this wasn't an empty gesture. It was a big deal. And after losing his wife, he made that gesture to keep his son close to him, and then, in a way, he lost his son as well. And that was obviously in no small part due to his own stubbornness, but it's still pretty sad. And now, all these years later, his diner is really all he has. And for his regular customer to prefer the baby you can chive my car burger over the usual order he's gotten for 30 plus years, it means more than just a meal to Big Bob. I think what I really love most about this story is that it makes you empathize with a character who, until the point where you actually feel for him, is pretty hateable. And yet, when the moment comes, you get it. He's an old, stubborn guy who has become bitter because of decades-old heartbreak and loss, and his son actually coming around and understanding how hard it must have been for him is kind of the best gift he could have received. And Bob, in turn, learns that though his dad was hurt, he was always proud of him, even keeping his first newspaper review of Bob's Burgers.
It was tough without your mom around. You did great on your own. She'd be very proud.
Man, this one just really gets to the heart of these characters, gives us some incredible Bob backstory, and does so in a heartwarming Christmas package. One of my favorite Christmas episodes easily.
Oh, bourbon, oh, bourbon, oh, bourbon, oh, bourbon.
Obviously, the kids always play a role in these Christmas episodes, but the first three were very Bob-focused, and this one opted to give the Belcher siblings the primary roles. And who do they come into conflict with this year? Santa himself.
I'm Santa. You just kick Santa out of the massage chair.
So even though the kids don't think this is the actual Santa, they're quickly convinced that he's still part of the larger Santa system, and that they might be put on the naughty list for this.
I never imagined he'd use mall Santas as his eyes and ears. It's Brilliant!
This is a fun twist on these Bob's Christmas conflicts. Putting the kids' Christmas gifts in direct jeopardy, or so they think, creates a really difficult test of character. Because then the major question becomes, are they doing good things because they're good, or because they want gifts? Their initial attempts to make good with the mall Santa does not go well.
Are you trying to bribe us?
Tina, milk!
But what starts as the kids trying to show Santa that they're actually good kids turns into them lying to seem like they're even better than they are, and their big plan is to explain all of the nice things they did to Santa in a big ice show at the mall. Maybe a little convoluted and definitely self-serving, which becomes increasingly clear, especially when they postpone the entire performance because Mall Santa took a break to go shopping.
We need him now!
Honestly, the entire performance is pretty hard to watch. These kids just going on stage and fully bragging about the best things they haven't even done, especially after Louise pressures Gene and Tina into performing when they express concern.
So I did what I had to do to save the world. I ate the nuggets! I ate the evil nuggets! Yeah!
But it definitely makes Louise's realization work pretty well, growing a conscience at the last possible minute, owning up to everything and apologizing.
I mean, a nice person doesn't put on a nice capades. They wouldn't need to.
I think I maybe wish that something that Mall Santa had said, done, or experienced would have impressed on Louise to make her have this revelation, because as it stands, she sort of just comes to her senses out on the ice. There is this nice moment where she sees her own reflection in the ice, and this is kind of what brings her to this realization, and I love to see that. It works well. I just feel like it kind of dawns on her later than it should have. Regardless, I also think this is a really nice moment, and I particularly like how Mall Santa responds to Louise's confession.
You may care about what Santa thinks of you, but I think you care more about what you think of you.
I think this episode gets most points from me for the premise, and a pretty great performance from Henry Winkler as Mall Santa as well. The whole concept of putting on a nice capades to get off the naughty list is fun, but I do think it also sort of meanders with a few subplots. Bob's argument with Edith and Harold is funny.
Because it's Christmas Eve. On Christmas Eve, we jack the prices way up.
As was Bob's assignment to get Mall Santa's nephew a gift, but Mr. Fischoder's liquor-themed Christmas carol felt a little time-fillery and disconnected from the rest of the episode, but ultimately, the highs of this one super outweigh the lows. It's a fun premise, a fun performance, and a fun Christmas conflict.
I can spell Christmas without a U.
For season 7, Bob's changed things up just a little bit for their Christmas stories. They often tend to focus on whether or not the Belchers can make ends meet, and this one is no different in that regard, but this one also focuses a bit on Bob's internal struggle, lamenting the massive binders of gifts the kids have asked for, which sets up Bob's through line pretty well.
It's just sometimes this holiday makes me feel like I'm a failure.
In this one, the family is planning to go caroling together, but Bob gets mysteriously called to deliver food to Mr. Fischoder's house.
Nothing weird, he said, which is troubling.
And then when they get there, he gets roped into participating in this gingerbread house building contest with Fischoder's rich friends. It ties into the issues at hand pretty well. Fischoder offers Bob some free rent that Bob can then use to get his family gifts to make him feel less like a failure, but ironically, to do so, he'll have to intentionally fail in the competition. That's good writing, especially because Bob is actually pretty good at gingerbread houses, and I liked this little insight into his childhood.
My mom and I used to build them together before she died. It was kind of our thing.
Yeah. Okay.
However, two things happen. Mr. Fischoder continues to be a real asshole to Bob, and Bob learns that the prize is a chance to cuddle an albino polar bear that his kids have been obsessing over.
Kids love baby animals?
I don't think that's right.
But they do.
Which sets the stage for Bob to really achieve all of his goals here, to give his kids an amazing Christmas gift and decidedly not be a failure in this competition, as long as he wins. It's a great setup and dilemma for Bob.
I'm gonna try to win this thing. My kids would love that polar bear cuddle.
And also just such a fun setting and tone for a Christmas episode. Secret Society stuff is really fun, and even more fun when they're doing something super silly like building gingerbread houses. Like, why do you need a secret society for that? That's great stuff. The subplot of the episode is that aforementioned caroling, and it does not go particularly well for the rest of the Belchers and Teddy. They just completely fail to spread Christmas cheer in the way they'd hoped, until they decide to go to the creepiest house on the street as a last-ditch effort, another classic example of Bob's layering a horror-y moment into another holiday. But as it turns out, the hermit in the creepy house with the sheets over its windows was exactly the guy who needed the most Christmas cheer, even if he came off wildly creepy at first.
Why don't you come a little closer so I can hear you better?
This episode really hits hits in the climax as the creepy guy starts to sing absolutely beautifully just as the gingerbread competition hits a breaking point, giving us this awesome slow motion scene where all of the rich guys shoot each other's gingerbread houses under this man's incredible singing voice. It is a great sequence. The family gets the cocoa they wanted while caroling, Bob's house is the least destroyed so he wins the competition, and the kids get this amazing experience with this polar bear cub. This is just a very solid Bob-focused Christmas episode, one where Bob really gets to use his skills to win a competition, a great way to quell his own fears about being a failure, achieving specific skill-based success that directly solves the thing that made him feel like a failure in the first place. This is another strong Bob's Christmas story.
Twinkly lights, that's what makes Christmas bright.
For Season 8, Bob's Burgers opted for a supersized 2-part Christmas special called The Bleakening, and these things are doing a lot. Honestly, maybe too much. This one is a musical with like 4 or 5 musical sequences across the 2 episodes, and it also throws both a detective-y mystery plot in the mix with a horror-y Christmas cryptid called The Bleaken. And in some ways, these stories do weave together reasonably well, but in others, it feels a tiny bit overstuffed. I think the thing that works best is this is the first to start to lean a little bit more into Linda's obsessive Christmas behavior. The inciting incident is that she has a dream that inspires her to hold an impromptu Christmas party at the restaurant, and her haphazard preparation for the quick party includes cutting off the top of their Christmas tree and putting it downstairs, which is what really sets the story off.
And my little tree looks so good. Oh my god!
The way this first episode is structured, it basically uses the party to showcase who will become the list of suspects for Linda and Bob's investigation, which leads to a crosstown interrogation of all the guests, and also yields no successful results. I do think that the fact that this is a 2-parter allowed them to set up the kids' subplot and tie it into the missing tree plot pretty effectively for part 2, and it's mostly about the titular Bleakening.
The Bleaken is a horned creature with lizard skin and black feathers who comes every once in a while.
So while Bob and Linda try to track down the thief, the kids spiral about a possible monster that's going to steal their presents. These aspects of the setup work pretty damn well for me, and if I'm being honest, the one thing I don't love in this 2-parter are the songs, which is surprising because Bob's has so many great songs, and it's not even that I dislike the songs themselves, it's more that I'm so invested in the mystery and the bleak and cryptid concerns from the kids that it feels jarring every time they shift into the musical sequences. I keep forgetting that it was a musical episode because that wasn't the thing about the episode that hooked me, but overall, it is a fun setup. It sets up stakes for Linda since her favorite ornaments from the kids were on that stolen tree. It sets up stakes for the kids since they think the Bleaken is responsible and is going to steal their presents, and part 1 ends on this incredible shot with this beautifully framed shot out the window showing the kids walking next to the topless Christmas tree. But I think the real success of these episodes is in part 2, in Linda's story. For the most part, the suspense and lead up to the big climax works well in terms of mood and tone, but not all that much happens. The kids discover more clues that seem like they're leading to the Bleaken. Bob and Linda try to track them down. There's a Wile E. Coyote mural on a wall that leads to a creepy staircase that goes seemingly nowhere. It's like a fun series of mysteries without a ton of substance. But it didn't lead to the Bleaken's lair, as you might have suspected. It all leads to a secret underground Christmas rave, set up early in part 1 when the local dance spot was shut down. But besides this just being visually a great location, I love Linda's lesson here. She is so caught up in her own expectations of Christmas that she really fails to look outside of herself.
But you know what I can't get back? My Christmas spirit!
Not that she was wrong to be mad that her stuff got stolen on Christmas, but the idea that she didn't really think about how or why this had happened. And when the rave goes into full swing and she sees how much magic and togetherness is in that room, she understands.
I thought Christmas gave up on me, but maybe I gave up on Christmas.
Linda even called the cops before coming to her senses and realized that because she felt her Christmas was ruined, she nearly ruined everybody else's Christmas, which leads to a pretty funny sequence where Bob, dressed as the Bleaken, who turned out to be a raver in costume by the way, distracts the cops and lets the party continue. I am overall a bit mixed on this 2-parter. I wasn't all that invested in the musical aspect outside of maybe the final song at the rave, and honestly the reveal of who stole the Christmas stuff was pretty underwhelming. The explanation that it was all stolen for the rave works great. The idea that it was this guy Art, a guy that they had already specifically interrogated without any real prior hints as to how or why he had pulled it off, made for a sort of unsatisfying answer to that part of the mystery. But there are many things I undeniably love. The second part in particular has such a great mood and a resolution that is really fun. It's a wildly heartwarming episode for Linda as a character. Overall, a fun couple of Christmas episodes.
Snowballs and sledding and snowballs.
Better Off Sled is a pretty fun episode, but I will say it feels the least Christmassy out of any of the Bob's Burgers Christmas episodes, at least to me. But the premise is great for a kid-centric storyline. After a record-breaking snowstorm covers the town in snow, the Belchers and friends go to the park to go sledding, only to find that they can't.
Here's a snowball in your spleen, and a snowball in your ween.
Yeah, this is a classic Louise versus Logan storyline. Logan and the older kids won't let any of the younger ones sled without absolutely pelting them with snowballs, so most of this episode is focused on this conflict. They want to sled, but they can't. And there's this push and pull between who takes ownership over the hill, back and forth, back and forth. They quickly gain possession thanks to help from Rudy's cousin who plays softball.
She makes underhand look like overhand.
But then Logan returns with a basketball player and things really just continue to devolve from there. There's also a super small subplot where Linda tries to take up knitting but is terrible at it, and Bob turns out to be a natural, which is very funny given Linda's obsessive Christmas tendencies.
Over to go to sleep. I could start a new scarf in the morning if you want.
Great. Good night.
I think my issue here is that while this is a really fun episode with a clear and solid kid-focused dilemma, the story and themes do not feel Christmassy to me. I love any time Louise and Logan face off against each other, and the snow day premise makes for a great inciting incident, but the push and pull of this war feels a little random. It's just sort of each side attacking back and forth, and each attack doesn't feel particularly well motivated by the prior attack. It's just sort of a bunch of stuff happening. In the end, Rudy ends up getting his cousin, who gets a bunch of other local athletes, to fully pelt and drive off Logan and co. But this really just feels like it comes out of nowhere. Even Rudy's explanation, while charming, is just sort of a, oh, here's what happened off screen moment.
And I saw you guys walking to the park with your sleds. I thought you were gonna get killed, so I called Mandy.
I guess with everybody coming together to take on Logan, there's at least a little bit of community Christmassy vibe, but these are all new characters we don't know, so it's hard to feel much connection to any of them. The one moment that does work Christmas-wise is Louise giving Logan something he doesn't deserve, saving him from the worst snowball pelting he could ever receive. I do think this is a nice Louise/Logan moment, but it feels kind of tacked on. I don't dislike this episode by any means, but I think it's the least successful in terms of embracing the Christmas themes. And it feels like it could have done a little bit more to make the whole Snow Hill War feel more dynamic. But it's Bob's Burgers, and that means it's still pretty fun. I do love this final beat where all three Belcher kids vastly prefer Linda's janky scarf to Bob's perfectly knitted ones.
You know what this means? I'm better at knitting than you. I knew it. Stick to burgers.
Oh my god.
Humbug, no, that's too strong, cause it's my favorite holiday.
By this point in Bob's Burgers, these Christmas episodes really started to shy away from the sort of perspective-shifting conflicts of the early Christmas stories and move into a bit more of a focus on the characters and their relationship to the holiday. One of my favorite through lines in these Bob's Christmas episodes is that Linda can get a little obsessive. Not quite Bob on Thanksgiving level, but Linda really romanticizes aspects of this holiday that the rest of the family doesn't, and this episode super embraces that. For this Christmas, Linda takes a temp job helping sort the extra holiday mail at the post office.
Have you seen her sort underpants? The woman's a prodigy.
Linda's description of exactly how she romanticizes the idea of Christmas and how she sees her sorting as this magical, helpful opportunity to be a bigger part of Christmas is so sincere and sweet.
And it's all because of us. Well, me temporarily. You're lucky you get to do it full time.
Huh?
And her overenthusiastic attitude at this wildly busy time of year for the post office is such a funny conflict for the postal workers. The supervisor, Donna, is just so instantly fed up with literally anything Linda says.
And then this one's going to the plant, and this one's going to the plant.
Linda, do you have to say that for every package?
But I think the conflict here is pretty great. Linda spots a guy desperately trying to get his package dropped off in time for Christmas, and when he actually manages to convince them to take it, she is overjoyed at what she witnessed.
I just spied on a Christmas miracle, like one of those goats looking at little baby Jesus.
However, when she later discovers that the package never made it onto the truck, she goes rogue and decides to take the present to the little boy herself. I think what I love most about this dilemma is how specifically Linda focused it is. Yes, it's a story about Linda trying to get this package to a kid on Christmas, and that feels like a very giving and reason for the season story, but in reality, this has more to do with the fact that this is what Christmas means to Linda. As I said earlier, how she romanticizes the holiday. She specifically believed that she witnessed a Christmas miracle when that package made it through the door, so the fact that it never actually made it onto the truck wasn't just a common post office mistake to Linda, it was something that basically denied her that Christmas miracle. If that present doesn't reach the kid, then she didn't witness a Christmas miracle at all, so she takes matters into her own hands, making herself an extension of that miracle. Even when it directly conflicts with the bureaucracy of the Postal Service, Linda even fully ignores Mike to make sure her miracle happens.
Listen, Mike, I'm sorry, but I gotta pretend my cell phone's not working now.
The subplot of the episode is also wildly funny. Bob and Tina are forced to entertain Linda's family without her, which is basically Bob's worst nightmare. He desperately tries to distract them from getting into an apparently recurring argument about an ottoman, which Gail is 100% wrong about, by the way. I mean, who falls asleep in an ottoman? But Bob even manages to smooth things over until Linda gets home. Not by actually solving the ottoman argument, but by faking a phone call to Gail from the bank.
I said she had too much money and it was overflowing and was a fire hazard.
This is so funny. But what really makes the episode work is Linda's sheer persistence and confidence that she is doing the right thing on Christmas, even when everyone tells her that she's wrong. She quite literally wills the miracle into existence and proves that Christmas is what she believes it is, even convincing Mike to make that final step for the delivery. It is a great Linda Christmas story.
How did I do as Santa Claus?
This season's Bob's decided to go back to the classic conflict formula for Christmas, this time pitting Bob against his old rival Jimmy Pesto. But the fun subversion this year is that the conflict is mostly in Bob's head. Bob's restaurant gets picked as one of the food vendors at the big yacht club Christmas party, and Bob has no idea why they were chosen. And because of this, he's maybe overthinking his menu plan.
And I can't wait to try out my I'm Breeing of a White Crispmas sliders.
But when Bob discovers that Jimmy Pesto was actually the one who suggested him for the event, he is absolutely convinced that it's a scheme to make him look bad. Somehow he lands on the idea that Jimmy is going to pants him in front of the entire yacht club, which I think just kind of shows how far Bob's delusions go when it comes to Jimmy P. But I think what works so great about this year's Christmas conflict is that while Bob's paranoia did stem from an understandable place, given Jimmy's history, it actually offers one of the rare instances where Bob and Jimmy do something kind for one another. And what better time for that than Christmas?
He wants to embarrass me and then high-five all his rich friends.
Of course, this isn't resolved until after they both panic and wrestle themselves overboard into the ocean, but the sentiments here are sweet, particularly when Jimmy reveals exactly why he suggested Bob in the first place.
I thought they would like your food and then they would like me because I recommended you and that's how I'd get into the thing.
Sure, there's a self-serving undertone to Jimmy's motivations here, but he also reluctantly and openly admits that he thinks Bob makes great food. Such good food that he thought the yacht club would be impressed enough to finally let him in. It's a pretty high compliment from Jimmy Pesto. And though it's awkward and stilted, this is one of the few times we see Bob go out of his way to actually help Jimmy, because he genuinely feels bad for him here. He tells the president of the yacht club flat out lies to make Jimmy seem better than he is.
Oh, mentor of food, and he's such a great guy.
Maybe best of all, he did this without even letting Jimmy know it. It's a purely selfless act and gift from Bob on Christmas. This episode also has a couple fun subplots. One is very small, with Linda just being obsessed with the mayor, one of my favorite running gags in the show, and then finding that the mayor actually loved Bob's sliders.
It landed on the ground and the mayor followed the 3-second rule.
But there's also a pretty great little Belcher kids subplot. They get kind of screwed out of free gifts from Santa's schooner because they have to work the event. So in classic Louise fashion, she concocts a plan to take a boat out and heist some of the gifts for themselves. And also in classic Louise fashion, she grows a conscience about it.
Seeing some excited faces, some Christmas joy, feeling some guilt, some regrets. Gonna close my eyes, don't like it.
This episode has that sort of classic karmic resolution we see in these specials, where the characters are rewarded when they finally do the right thing. 2 of them, actually, and they stem from these subplots. It isn't until after Bob actually talks up Jimmy that they get the word that the mayor loved their burger. And while typically I like to see a bit more of a direct correlation between the character doing the right thing and then that reward, this is still a pretty satisfying moment. But even more satisfying is how the kids are rewarded after they hand their presents back to Santa Teddy.
I knew you kids would do the right thing. Here's an RC car that goes too fast. We can't give it out.
You did it, Teddy. You're a good Santa. A real good Santa.
This is for sure a top-tier sweet Teddy moment, and overall, this episode does a ton of great Christmas stuff that I love.
He's got that tinsel at Christmas time.
Usually when these Christmas episodes focus on the kids, they tend to focus on them as a trio, which is why this year's episode was a fun change of pace, putting Gene front and center. And in classic Gene fashion, this one is all about music. The family is being driven a little nuts by Gene's persistent role as Christmas DJ in December.
It's way too early to blast this noise on my tender, tiny eardrums. I can barely hear myself think of stuff I want to ask Santa for.
This one even gives a little insight into some of Gene's musical origins when he discovers Bob's copy of Percy McTinselbud, a Christmas album.
I'll just donate it to the trash.
No, I want it. It makes me uncomfortable in a way I kind of like.
And Gene giving this bizarre album so much persistent playtime is not the Belchers' favorite thing about Christmas. In fact, they all sort of hate it, which sets the stage perfectly for one of those Bob's Burgers selfless Christmas acts. Gene accidentally breaks the album in two when he rolls over onto it while he's sleeping, and despite the fact that everybody in the family hates it, they do everything they can to try and help Gene find another copy. Louise and Tina go with him to the record store where they cannot find it. The record store owner looks online where he cannot find it. And then they go to Courtney's dad, who apparently is great at tracking down rare albums, only to discover the sad and rare origin. The album was only made for the band's fan club members, which there were very few of, and the remaining copies likely burned in a factory fire, which sends Gene spiraling.
I never want to hear any holiday music ever again.
You don't mean that.
This transitions into what has got to be my favorite selfless Belcher family act in the show. Even though literally every single member of the family outside of Gene literally hates that album, they recognize that what it means to Gene far outweighs their own disdain. So much so that they make an unthinkable decision.
We recreate Percy McTinselbud ourselves?
They literally re-record the entire album themselves from memory because they can't think of any other solution, which understandably is met with a mixed response from Gene.
No! I love it.
I really love this bizarre hallucinogenic scene for Gene here, where it obviously plays as this weird circumstance where Percy McTinselbud talks down Gene. The implication is really that it's how Gene is working through his own loss and recognizing the kind thing his family has done for him. Their recording is like this sad, bastardized version of something he loved, but it's not like everyone loved this album either.
But maybe someday you'll give the tape to your kids, and it'll be their favorite version.
I really like this specifically as a fantasy for Gene, particularly given the origins of how Gene got the record in the first place, being gifted it from his dad, who didn't even like the album himself. It's a really sweet insight into what's important to Gene and how rather than lament the loss of one of his most cherished memories, he can embrace and contribute to a new cherished memory by remixing the music they made for him. Ooh. This also has a funny subplot where Linda, Bob, Teddy, Mort, and Mike all do a secret Santa, and Teddy has a miserable time trying to find something for Mort, just full-on panic mode, and Bob struggles a little bit as well, but in the end, every single one of them loves the gifts they received. It's not a particularly meaningful or impactful story, but Teddy freaking out is always funny. But the main plot is just such a great Belcher family story. In particular, I love the sort of symbolism behind the album they recorded. When it was only 4 of the Belchers on the album, it didn't really work or sound good. But once Gene jumped in and that missing Belcher got on the album, it was complete. A solid Christmas episode. Oh man, I have been waiting to talk about The Plight Before Christmas. Season 13 delivered what is probably the best Christmas episode in Bob's Burgers history, even just starting with the premise, which really highlights the best aspects of the Belchers as a family. The episode starts as the family is preparing to go to 2 separate events. Gene has a big musical recital at school, and Tina is in a Thunder Girls play. Since they're at the exact same time, Bob has to take Gene and Linda has to take Tina, and they'll each be missing the counterpart, which Linda does not take well.
Cut me in half so I can go to both.
I just love that the conflict here is something that is dividing this very tight-knit family. The problem is that they can't all be together. Classic Belcher and a great Christmas conflict, which gets worse when they realize that Louise also has an event that night, a poetry reading she was picked for at the library.
There's gotta be a way. What time does everyone's thing start?
6.
I think this sets the stage so well. Everyone is split up, and they think they've got a reasonable solution worked out. Bob and Linda record their respective events, and sadly, Louise gets left out, but she is insistent that she's just reading a joke poem about poop, so it's fine if nobody shows up. But in the middle of each of the events, Tina works out that Louise was definitely lying, and that she likely wrote a genuine poem after Tina encouraged her.
I think Louise wrote a real poem for that library contest. I think she was embarrassed to admit that it might actually be important to her.
I just love that this episode truly shows how far the Belchers would go for each other. Bob tries desperately to get to Louise's reading and make it back to Gene's recital so that he can catch both. Tina continually tells Linda to leave her play to go see Louise's reading. It's also got this really nice Gene subplot where the recital is a complete disaster because Miss Merkin had to get her appendix removed, which does not go well at first.
I've never heard angry applause before.
And then in Act 2, which Bob barely makes it back for after failing to get in to see Louise's poem, Gene has an idea to remove many many of the keys from the kids' xylophones so that they're less likely to create clashing notes and tones. And I cannot express how damn incredibly all of these stories intersect. It is genuinely masterful and maybe one of the most emotionally impactful episodes of Bob's Burgers ever. Throughout the evening, they cut to Louise and see that she's sort of on the fence about reading her genuine poem or maybe doing the Louise thing and reading her poop poem and bailing. And I love this as this representation of the two sides of Louise's personality. She is definitely that chaotic kid, but she also is so genuine and has such a good heart, even when she doesn't want to admit it. This episode features just an astounding climax. Gene and his class start playing their xylophones, and it is just beautiful. But this plays under a montage of the Belchers. Linda watching Tina's play, Bob recording Gene, and Louise looking down at her two poems, only to reveal that Tina has swapped herself out of her costume at her play and rushed to see Louise's poem herself, arriving just in time. And her arrival is what helps Louise make the decision to read the real and genuine poem, which is so beautiful.
I can't see what's around the tree when I'm pawing through the presents, but when I sit back and get my present unwrapped, I look up and I see my parents.
It's this incredible, reflective poem about what's important at Christmas time, that when she's sitting at the tree opening presents, it's not the gifts themselves that ultimately brought her joy, but her family, her parents, her brother, her sister.
I was focusing on Santa, but the best presents are sitting here, and they aren't even wrapped up.
I cannot express how perfectly Bob's Burgers this is. It's this beautiful, sentimental reaffirmation that the show is about family. It is so wholesome. But I love it even more for what it says about these characters. Obviously, the lengths they're willing to go for each other is super apparent throughout the episode, but Louise in particular is a character who doesn't like to show her sappier sentimentality, even when she really does possess it deep down. She would never have told her family to come to this poetry reading, but when Tina arrives, she knew she wanted her to hear it. And it also so beautifully illustrates how the Belchers bring the best out of each other. Tina's encouragement led Louise to write the poem, and her arrival convinced Louise to embrace her genuine side instead of her chaotic side. Honestly, this episode deserves an entire dedicated video. It's not just a perfect Christmas episode, but it's a perfect Bob's Burgers episode. Their incredible Christmas masterpiece.
There's no disputing I love gluten.
The Nightmare 2 Days Before Christmas has a very solid, very Belcher setup and gives us a pretty great location for the holiday, but I think the coolest thing this episode does is sort of act as a conclusion to a little Linda Christmas arc we saw across a handful of these Christmas episodes. This one starts with the family miscommunicating as Linda starts to do her laundry. Bob is making toast, but since he's on the toilet, Linda can't hear him say this, and so the laundry completely blows out their power, to the point where it cannot be fixed until after Christmas. Like I said, very Belcher. Since it's mostly Mr. Fischoder's negligence that's the issue here, he decides to put them up in his family's hunting lodge. So as you might expect, the approach and location are very shining, which they actually call out.
There's no way Dad has the upper body strength to go full shining on us.
Yeah, half shining at most.
But like I said, this is really Linda's episode, and she refuses to go up to the lodge without their family Christmas tree. This has been such a funny through line in these Christmas episodes, from her panic about not having a tree and Christmas in the car, to her full investigation into her missing treetop in the bleakening, and this is a pretty amazing conclusion to that arc, because when the Belchers barely make it to the lodge in one piece, they realize the tree didn't make it at all.
Oh my god! What? Where's the tree?
Oh my god.
Where's the tree?
As they try to settle into the incredibly cool but also incredibly creepy hunting lodge, Linda just cannot take Christmas without the tree. So when the weather clears, she heads down the mountain to look for it, and she finds it, having fallen down a pretty steep snowy hill. Honestly, I think this dilemma is so perfect for Linda. She basically spends her entire day trying to drag that tree back up to the car by herself, only to slide back down every time she gets close. And this really aligns with the issues we've seen from Linda in terms of her own obsessive tendencies and romanticization of Christmas. She feels that without the family tree, it's not really Christmas, but by desperately clinging to this vision of what Christmas should be, she ends up wasting her entire day and not actually spending any time with her family, the obviously far more important part of Christmas. But they give Linda this dramatic and very Linda moment where she says goodbye to the tree.
And I'm kind of missing Christmas Eve over here. I know I picked you out of all the other trees, and you were the one, you really were. But I gotta leave you here, my sweet baby.
This isn't one of my favorite Christmas episodes or anything, but I think this is such a great idea. Take one of the things we've seen from Linda across so many of these stories and really put a focus on it to allow her a bit of Christmas growth. And in the end, she gets her family and her tree.
We made one.
Oh, it's the best Christmas tree ever!
Between the great Linda character stuff and a truly awesome and creepy location, this is a solid Bob's Christmas entry.
Crazy cosmic Christmas stuff!
And finally, we've reached the most recent Bob's Burgers Christmas episode, which just aired about a week ago as of the time I'm writing this. And man, did they nail it this year. This episode really focuses on all the things that make the Belchers so charming. The kids are desperate to get that new portable game console, the Game Whiz, for Christmas, and they're sure that since they were good and asked for it so nicely and are combining all of their presents, that Bob and Linda will definitely get it for them, which does not happen.
Oh, they look not happy.
It's like all the light just left their eyes.
One thing I love about this moment here is that despite the fact that all of them are immeasurably disappointed, they're really good kids. They try so hard not to let Bob and Linda see that. Even though they desperately wanted that Game Whiz, they knew that it wasn't really Bob and Linda's fault for not being able to afford it, and they don't want to make them feel worse for not being able to get them what they wanted. But nothing brings a family closer together like a little Christmas emergency. They decide to go down to a fancy neighborhood to look at all the amazing Christmas light displays, and Gene finds this adorable puppy. But Gene being Gene, he also feeds him a whole bunch of chocolate, having zero idea that this is bad. Until Bob tells him, of course.
Oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, I poisoned a puppy!
On Christmas.
I know it's Christmas!
So the Belchers have to team up, find the puppy, and make it puke before it's too late.
Or it could be,
What?
we're gonna need a smaller hearse.
What really works great about this episode is that once they start tracking down the puppy, Louise's disappointment about the Game Whiz starts to disappear because she starts to get her hopes up about something else, the puppy.
Hi, I'm Louise. I'm your soulmate.
This is not just a heartwarming part of the story, but it's completely understandable. I mean, how would a kid not fall in love with this puppy? And after a wildly disappointing Christmas, Louise turns all of that devastation into blind optimism. Sure that this was meant to be, and that suddenly Christmas is saved. Until...
But we can't have the Christmas we wanted with the dog. The owner's not even looking for it.
Oh my god, is that our puppy?
Louise has to not only endure that initial disappointment, but then she has to consciously recognize that her hopes for a perfect Christmas were actually selfish, and that the right thing to do at Christmas time is to give up this puppy for the poor kid who actually lost it. Which, I mean, let's be honest, would be devastating for any kid, but probably even worse for Louise here. But in perfect Bob's Burgers fashion, after Louise eventually does the right thing, they are karmically rewarded.
Let me give you guys something.
Oh, whoa.
Holy sugar cookies!
And with this reward money, they're actually able to buy the kids the Game Whiz they wanted in the first place. God, I love a happy ending. This is just such a beautiful Belcher Christmas. One of those excellent episodes where doing the right thing, even when it hurts, ends up being the most rewarding. Literally. An excellent Christmas episode. So there it is, all 14 Bob's Burgers episodes and 13 Bob's Burgers Christmas stories so far. You know, because of the two-parter. I may be in the minority, but I actually think some of these Christmas episodes are absolute peak Bob's Burgers, and some of the most insightful character explorations in the entire series. I hope you enjoyed this video. Comment below with your favorite Bob's Burgers Christmas episode, why it's your favorite, and also give me your entire Christmas ranking. Merry Christmas!